All right, tonight's program, we are honored to have with us Simeon Hein on the subject of ball lightning, orbs, and coherent matter phenomenon in the UFO, crop circle, and cryptoid environments or encounters. Dr. Hein is a former professor of statistics and research methods.
Did you hear what's about ball lightning and other stuff?
No.
Ball lightning. I always wonder what the hell, how they explain that.
Right.
You're going to find out.
Yeah. Dr. Hein came across the subject of remote viewing in 1996 and took a class as an open-minded skeptic.
That was me then.
Surprisingly positive training results convinced Dr. Hein that a large area of scientific knowledge is withheld from the public or from public discussion. Subsequently, he established the nonprofit Institute for Resonance, began teaching remote viewing classes in Boulder, Colorado, and continues to teach online. He also became interested in crop circles, UFOs, and extraterrestrials. Dr. Hein is the director of a research and teaching company, the Mount Baldy Institute, founded in 1997, to give people the opportunity to learn remote viewing. He also has taken people on crop circle tours in the UK. He has written several books, including Opening Minds, A Journey of Extraordinary Encounters, Crop Circles and Resonance, Black Swan Ghosts, a sociologist encounters witnesses to unexplained aerial craft, occupants, and other multiverse elements. And you can find Dr. Hein on YouTube and Twitter. You can read his blog at newcrystalmind.com. And with that, I will turn the meeting over to you, Dr. Hein.
Well, thanks very much, Eric. And can you hear me okay?
I can.
Great.
I hope everybody can.
Thanks for that introduction, Eric. I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for showing up tonight. I'm really excited to give you this presentation. It is really since 1997 that I really started looking into all these phenomena. My RV training was the year before in 1996, but this really marks the 25th year anniversary of my investigation into a lot of phenomena that we, I guess, sometimes is called paranormal or supernatural, whatever label you want to give it. And tonight I want to present to you my findings on these subjects and what I think the underlying science that exists that provides a commonality between seemingly different phenomena in these categories of, non-ordinary phenomena, anomalous phenomena. We know what we're talking about here, and there's a lot of symptomology which is really common to these phenomena. And I think we now have ideas that can explain some of it and give us a sense of what sort of realities we're encountering and what the basis of it is to some degree. And it allows us to reformulate our understanding of who we're encountering, where they may exist in their realities, and the types of, I would say, real cultural and intellectual growth that we need to make, and scientifically, obviously, to catch up to understanding the universe that we live in, and make sense of it and really react to it, I think, in a more metered and intelligent way rather than just being afraid of it and seeing it as something that's completely unexplainable. Okay. So what I'm about to present to you is my understanding of these phenomena. You might have different interpretations of it. You might not agree with me. It's fine. And we can cover all this in the Q&A. So I guess we'll talk for about an hour and a half. I'll talk. And you can, at the questions and answers, you can bring up your views of these subjects. This is my interpretation of all these phenomena and how I ended up writing a book, Dark Matter Monsters. How did I go from remote viewing to crop circles to UFOs to Bigfoot and cryptids, as they're called? What's the connection there? What's the connection to dark matter, cosmology? I think you're going to enjoy this. So I will present you my understanding and let's see where that takes us. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here and let's see if that works. Okay. Hey, we've got a screen. So I guess my title is slightly different than what I communicated to Don. It's the same material. We're going to talk about coherent matter, fractal toroids, crop circles, and dark matter energy, dark matter life, and see what the links are between these different topics, because there's been a lot of research done recently in the past 10 or 20 years in these areas, especially coherent matter, ball lightning, fractal toroidal shapes, dark matter. A lot of it has not come out of the US, which is why I'm excited to talk about this. A lot of this research comes from other countries, including Japan, former Soviet Union, Russia, China, and other countries. For some reason, the US hasn't really shared this, though. As I'm about to show you, it's well known to defense contractors, special access programs, the US government. For some reason, we don't have a lot of public discussion about this, even within science itself. And I think we should be talking about it because there's a lot to learn here, and I think it could really improve our lives and the condition of our planet in so many ways. So how did I get involved with this? People always ask me what led me to go in some of these directions that we're about to talk about. When I was 11 or 12, my mom, who was a bird watcher, took me down to the Everglades so we could go looking for birds in the Everglades, all sorts of amazing types of creatures that you have living in those swamps and birds and the flora and fauna. Well, we were out there with our binoculars. No one else was around. And all of a sudden, overhead, I noticed a very large circular object that was about the size of a full moon on the horizon. So I said to, and I looked at it, and it was a kind of a funny color, and it was kind of amorphous. So I said, Mom, look at the moon. And she said, she knew the moon was over on the horizon, lower down there. And I was saying, no, Mom, take a look. She said, sure, kid. Mom, look. And we both looked up. It was a large circular glowing object. We had binoculars. When we looked at it through binoculars, there was a pattern of dots in it that roughly formed a Z. So to me, it was quite strange thinking, is this a perfectly circular cloud? And then why would it have a structure of dots in it that you could see very well with the binoculars that looked like man-made structures? My 11-year-old mind couldn't quite make sense of this. I knew we weren't that far from Canaveral. So I was actually thinking, even at that age, maybe this is like an exploded rocket or a rocket test that went awry, and this is some debris that's just hovering there. Well, no sooner had I had that thought than this object starts moving from a stationary position very rapidly into a cloud nearby and disappears. And so my mom immediately said, no, Sim, it's a UFO. And it definitely had a strange feeling like, what is this? Should this exist here? Well, we went to the ranger talk that night, as they often have in national parks. And we noticed a blackout in the whole area. And as soon as we sat down, the ranger said, well, did anyone see anything interesting today? So my mom, being the brave soul that she is, she raised her hand and said, yeah, we saw a UFO. And the ranger said, that's interesting. Did anyone else see anything today that they want to talk about? Like, she totally skirted the subject. Now, I immediately saw, even as a very young person back then, that there was some sort of split in reality here. The people sitting next to us had also seen this object, and now there was a blackout, so they couldn't show us slides or anything. So we just thought this was very strange. So that's my experience as an 11-year-old, something I couldn't resolve. I did not have a continuous interest in this subject since then, though I did read a few books here and there. I had read John Keel's Mothman Prophecies as a teenager. Found that to be very interesting. Wasn't sure what to make of that. And then sometime in college, I came across a book called Above Top Secret by Timothy Good. And that, boy, did that have a lot of pictures in there. And I kept thinking about my experience as an 11-year-old. And then it all just disappeared. I went to graduate school continuously. I went from the East Coast, Hampshire College, to University of Arizona, Tucson, then another 5 years at WSU, where I got my PhD in sociology. and became a statistics teacher. I didn't have any connection to these topics anymore. I never heard the word UFO mentioned ever anywhere in all these years since I read Timothy Good's book. I never talked to anyone about it. I never heard about crop circles in the 90s. I had no knowledge of these topics. So let me show you how I did get involved in it. I think you'll see this is kind of interesting. I studied as a sociologist. I was interested in research methods. How do you gather data? How do you make sense of the world around us? And someone introduced me to the concept of fractal geometry. Now, for those of you that know what fractal geometry is, or if you don't, it's self-similar objects that look the same at any scale, objects that don't resolve to a line. We're educated in the Western world to think in terms of Euclidean geometry from the Greeks, where things are orderly. There are these very regular types of shapes that the Greeks like to talk about and think about, and everything could be resolved to very, straight lines and so forth, triangles and squares and so forth. But people have been pointing out, mathematicians, for 100 years that, the real world that we live in doesn't usually look like that. The things that we make as humans often have straight lines and organized shapes, but nature doesn't look like that. Nature has these branching structures that look the same at different scales, that keep branching out like a tree, or this is just an abstract piece of art, but it conveys the same idea that the large scale looks like the small scale, as above, so below. And objects around us look like that, and they can be reproduced with very simple mathematical equations that are called recursive, that you keep feeding back the results back into the equation, and you can create things that look like trees. Trees are a good example of fractals because you have a trunk, it breaks into more branches and then more branches, and whatever scale you look at the tree, it has the same sort of fractured, broken up shape, but it's continuous. And that's the idea of a fractal. Our body is built around fractal shapes, and Scientific American had a article that I read while I was doing my dissertation way back in 1990 about human physiology, fractal geometry. And this was a computer-generated version of our lungs, the bronchial structure, which again has sort of fractured fractal qualities because you have, two main lungs and it keeps breaking into more branches. And the reason nature does that is because it gives a lot of surface area in a finite volume, the space of your body. Your lungs need to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide and different gases. So you need a lot of surface area in there. And if you keep breaking up into smaller and smaller branches, you can get a lot more action with your lungs than if they were ordinary, regular, flat shapes with defined lines. Similarly, with the cardiovascular system, this is again a sort of computer-generated version of blood vessels, but they are the same way. You have some main blood vessels and they branch off and they keep branching all the way down to the smallest levels to reach your cells, right? And this is the way nature, again, in a finite volume, creates a lot of energy and chemical exchange because it keeps branching off and branching off. And the idea with fractals is it would never resolve to a line. It's somewhere between dimensions. Time often looks like this. If you look at time signals of electronics or music, across a big scale, you get the same sort of waveforms at a smaller scale. And in this example, just from my book, Opening Minds, I had the artist draw, that 1 second, the waveforms can look like 1 hour or 1 year. That's sort of fractals in time. And we see this in music where you find sort of the similar patterns at the large scale versus the small scale. It's called a 1/f spectrum. Now, the example that people often use to illustrate the practicality of this is the coastline of England example, which Benoit Mandelbrot, who was one of the inventors of fractal geometry. Benoit Mandelbrot was working in the area of line noise in signals, and he was working for IBM. And what he found is that in telephone lines, you get this fractal sort of noise signature that it seems the same over 1 hour or over 1 year. And he found these same patterns in financial markets. And so the essence of the idea here is that objects don't really have a defined length or space. And the example in the coastline of England is that what is the length of the coastline of England? And the answer is it depends on the size of your ruler, right? Because if your ruler is 200 kilometers, like this first example on the left, you'll get one sort of sense of the circumference of the whole coastline there, the whole length of the coastline if you went around the whole island. But if your ruler goes down to 50 kilometers, as you see on the right, now you have more length. And if your ruler keeps getting smaller and smaller, you're going to find more nooks and crannies in inlets and in between rocks. And if your ruler is small enough, you're going to have spaces between sand grains. So the length of the coastline would become infinite as your ruler gets smaller and smaller. What you would be left with, though, as a definite measurement is the fractal dimension of the coastline. In the case of England, I think it's something like 1.2. Well, what does that mean, 1.2? Well, it's more than a line, which is one-dimensional, but it's less than a total surface, which is two-dimensional, so it's between 1 and 2. Another example of that would be clouds. Clouds typically have a fractal dimension of 2.2 to 2.3. What does that mean? Well, they're more than a two-dimensional surface like a tabletop, but they're less than a three-dimensional object. They don't completely fill the space because the closer you look at a cloud, the more little, fingers you see of it, and it resolves to drops, and you never really find the end of it. It's fractal. It just keeps, it doesn't resolve to a single object. It resolves to a fractured fractal object. So you can get the dimension of it, but you actually can't say that it completely fills a three-dimensional space because there's a lot of space within the cloud itself, just like in our bronchial structure, cardiovascular structure. So nature actually works around fractals. Now, in graduate school, I was really interested in this as a way of measuring information because I was working off this idea that kind of went against the thinking of the time that information technology creates more information. I was taking the opposite point of view that information tech, and this is before the age of cell phones. This is around 1990 in that time period, but we had, PCs and Apple had come out with some computers by then, that if you speed time up too quickly in terms of our interactions with each other and with nature and with machines, you could be losing long-term information. And so information technology could be lowering our sort of informational fractal dimension. We could be losing information. The idea that information technology could destroy information. The idea when you digitize it, you're losing some of this complexity in order to fit it into a mechanistic system. So that's where I was coming from in terms of my graduate training. And I was open to the idea that there might be other sorts of information that didn't fit the sort of linear mechanistic ideas that we're very familiar with. The idea that there could be information that's lost. And the reason sociologists are concerned about this is sociologists do something called survey research. They want to make sure that their surveys are actually getting accurate opinions of people. We know about this now because pretty much anything you do online, you're asked to fill out a survey now. Anytime you stay in any hotel or rent a car, anything you do, and you shop in a store, they want a survey. So sociologists are concerned, are we getting all the information? Is there bias in the system? Are people hiding information? Is there some sort of stigma associated with telling what you really think? So this is a major concern to sociologists. I think you can see how this relates to topics we're dealing with right now concerning UFOs and UAP. But back then, I was this introduction to the idea of fractal geometry and the idea that things don't really have a defined metric, that they have a defined sort of dimension, but not necessarily a defined shape, opened my mind to the possibility that there could be alternative forms of information that we weren't picking up with conventional technology, that technological information systems were missing a layer of information. So when I came across the concept of remote viewing a few years later, when I moved to Boulder, Colorado, I heard someone named Dr. Courtney Brown, you might be familiar with. He had written this book called Cosmic Voyage. He was talking to my local radio station. And he said there was this thing called remote viewing, that the government had had a program since the 1970s to create a cadre of psychic spies. The Russians had invented this, and the Pentagon was concerned that they might be better at it than we were, and that we had no defense against their psychic spies seeing our military secrets. And that the main thing that really shocked me, what he said, but I was again open to it, that there might be alternative information, forms of transmission that we weren't picking up with information technology. He said that anybody could learn to perceive non-local information. That is, people, places, and events that are seemingly not getting picked up by your physical senses. In other words, psychic functioning. And at the time, I thought, okay, I was open to the idea. Again, I'd studied fractals. My graduate committee was not into fractals. They thought that was pretty weird, chaos theory. So in the same way, I was sort of open to the idea that there could be other ways that we exchange and receive information, but I didn't think I could do it. And I thought, I think I'd seen some shows where you saw those women psychics, Bevy Yeagers and those others working on police cases in the 80s. Remember that was on TV, and they'd have all those shows with Robert Stack, all those shows demonstrating, but those were like special people. I didn't think the average person could do it, but I was wrong. I took the class that Courtney was offering, and I found within a few days, I was getting results, and other people in the class were getting results, where you could describe what was in a folder well before you were seeing it. You know, you wouldn't be shown the contents of the folder or the picture until the session was over, but yet you were getting some pretty accurate results. Remote viewing, what I call resonant viewing, it's done on pieces of paper. What you see here in front of you is an example of the stages and phases. Ingo Swann had created a system at SRI, not too far from you all, where he said that the average person could learn to do this. He had broken down in his mind. He was a natural psychic they invited to study at SRI. Hal Putoff asked him to come out there. Ingo had contacted them. Ingo was someone that was born with these abilities. He could affect thermistors, you know, little transistors in thermos bottles and things like this. And that had been documented. And so he had worked with a woman named Gertrude Schmeidler at CUNY in New York City. So he developed this written protocol. And you work in these stages and phases. What the amazing thing to me was that there was obviously the results from this were positive, much more positive than I thought they could be. And it opened me up to the idea that maybe in all those years of being in school, there was actually something even bigger than fractals and chaos theory that was missing. Something important in the way you and I interact with reality that no one had ever talked to me about any of this. I had grown up like a lot of you thinking that maybe there were natural psychics like Ingo or people you could see do demonstrations, but I didn't think the average person had this ability, but they do. And the course, I proved it to myself, and I saw other people in the class doing this. So what do these sessions look like? Typically, you have a picture that's hidden in a folder, and the viewer goes through these stages and phases like an aperture opening up. You just see little bits of it or sense just basic aspects. But as you persist in the session over 10, 20 minutes, an hour, the aperture opens and you begin to receive sensory information, dimensional information. And it's quite astounding how accurate it can be. And I've seen this so many times with beginners in these classes. So here's an example where the person was able to draw the Washington Monument. That was the target. They got it so quickly. This is page 2. They didn't think that could be it. So they walked around in their mind along the reflecting pool and ended up at the Lincoln Memorial. But they definitely nailed this target. And when not every session looks like this, but when the viewer locks onto the target, the signal line as we call it, they do seem to get accurate information. I mean, here's a race car. The viewer draws a race car with the same shape. This is a double-blind target. You could think maybe somehow the viewer's reading the mind of the person that set the session up, some sort of telepathic overlay or something. But even if you do a double-blind, it still works. In this case, this is a laptop advertisement, and the person who's doing the session in their phase 3 area does a very accurate drawing of that screen. I mean, and they say it's moving up, and their verbal description is also very accurate. Here's a session. I taught this for a while in Japan. Even you can see they do a very good job reproducing the inside of that target. Now, the way this system was developed, you could move the viewer around in space and time. You could have them walk over to a section in the room. You could have them look in file cabinets and read code names and do all this stuff, as Pat Price and Ingo Swann were occasionally tasked to do, and others. And so this really sort of blew my mind open that this was a possibility. And it opened me up to many other topics. Eric and I were having a discussion just a few moments ago about, some of these topics. Is it paranormal? Do you want to keep the paranormal out of it? Well, I found it's a discussion that, we often have with these subjects, and some people want it to be more nuts and bolts, and some people are more open to the other phenomena that go along with it. I found that just being involved in RV, there were experiences that people were having that didn't fit in any ordinary knowledge boxes that I was used to, or you're probably used to. And this goes all the way back to Uri Geller, the first test subject at SRI. They invited Uri to come over because he was well known as being a psychic, someone that could do PK, psychokinesis. And if you've read any of the accounts, you can read this in Jim Schnabel's book, Remote Viewers. The researchers that worked with Uri had very strange experiences. The cryptid idea that there's this hitchhiker effect, and we'll talk about this in a moment, that things can follow you home from haunted sites or paranormal locations. I mean, that started with Uri Geller. The researchers would see some of them saw very large birds inside their bedrooms at the foot of the bed. There were little UFOs seen flying around Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, if I'm not mistaken. And even aports. Aports are material objects that show up out of nowhere. And on a couple occasions, objects, I believe, that either Russell Targ or Hal Puthoff had lost showed up. And they flying out of the sky at their feet. In one case, they found a lapel pin in ice cream they had just bought on the beach. These things seem to happen around Uri. Not only was he an excellent remote viewer, and by the way, you can watch this. Don't take my word for it. Go watch the movie Third Eye Spies by Lance Mungia. You can find it on all streaming services, Third Eye Spies. It shows these original black and white films they took of Uri viewing objects in boxes. I mean, he just nails it, one after the other after the other. He could also bend things with his mind. And these strange sorts of occurrences happened around Uri. Now, Uri he's always said that his ability to engage these phenomena, to be psychic, to do psychokinesis, started in an encounter with a ball of light, ball lightning, orbs. We're going to talk about this more in a moment, in his apartment complex in Israel. You've probably heard this. And he said he ran away from this orb, but it followed him and it made contact with him. And I think he became unconscious for a while, fell down. And when he came to, he had these powers or started developing them. I wasn't sure if this was just a tall tale or not. I mean, again, I'm from academics. You sort of want something to back up some of these stories. But just recently, one of his apartment neighbors came forward and said they saw the whole thing from their porch. Okay? They saw Uri running away from a ball of light. So again, I think these phenomena are inherently sort of weird. And as much as our minds would like them to fit into the reality boxes that we're used to, they just don't. But there doesn't mean there's an underlying pattern underneath it, which I'm going to show you what I think that is. I think a lot of this comes down to resonance, viewing. A lot of the phenomena I'm about to show you, without a doubt, are a type of resonance effect. And the simple way to explain that is, if you've ever seen this demonstration, that if you have two tuning forks that are tuned to the same frequency, you could hit one tuning fork and the other will start ringing spontaneously if they're at the same note. And that's the idea of resonance, is you don't need to add extra energy to the system. It's if they're tuned to the same frequency, they'll start spontaneously communicating. And this is how, as a kid, I built radio kits and Heath kits, and I went to Radio Shack a lot. I was very interested in assembling electronics. The radios work this way. You're tuning to a signal. And that resonance is really the basis of all these technologies. We just have different ways of sort of tuning into it. But I think resonance is the basis of a lot of this, and we'll see this in a moment. One of the first targets I had, or I should say, first strange targets. So when you do RV training, you start with verifiable targets, right? We're talking about some of the ordinary stuff I just showed you. Eiffel Tower, Washington Monument, Mount Kilimanjaro, well-known locations and places where at the end of the session, you can see if you did a good job or not, right? Because it's verifiable. You can see, did you make it all up? Was it all your imagination, or did you actually connect with the target and describe, like you just saw with that Washington Monument target, where you don't have any doubt that that's what the viewer drew, right? But it's also fun to do so-called non-verifiable targets, non-ordinary targets, things where you'd like to get more information about it. UFOs would be a perfect example of that. Or strange locations where you can't go to, like Mars or something, structures on Mars, face on Mars, stuff like structures on the moon. In fact, Ingo he wrote a book about this called Penetrations, and it's about an intelligence agency that contacted him in the 70s, apparently an intelligence agency, which we're told is still black to this day, is unknown, has not been identified, according to a recent RV meeting I attended. He was asked to view the moon and the structures. And when he started getting structures on the moon, he said that the people from this agency didn't seem surprised at all. Like, they already knew about it. They just wanted to see if he could pick them up. So those are the sorts of targets that you can do once you've had some training. Ingo, in that case, had some feedback from the people he was working around the agency, who tasked him to view these moon targets. I mean, they didn't tell him it was the moon, but he could figure it out after a while from the barrenness of it. But there were structures there. So this was one of my first anomalous non-ordinary targets, a crop circle. I didn't know what they were in 90s. I had never heard of the word crop circle, guys. I'd been in graduate school for years. They don't talk about these things in academia. But here was this interesting target. This is the Windmill Hill Triple Julia set from 1996. I actually got some very interesting results that, to me, made me curious about this topic. I actually wanted to go over there and see what these were. And so I attended a UFO conference in the Denver area just out of curiosity. The reason, these topics sort of go together. There is this overlap. Some of the people that attended Farsight, there was a guy named, you might have run across this person, John Stevens, who worked for NASA for a while. He was specialized in taking 16 millimeter film and transferring it to video. He had created a device that could do this. And he told us that when you took this film that NASA had taken to the moon, you could see structures on it, without a doubt, no doubt structures. And the public hadn't seen these films, but he had seen them transferring the video. And so he said, no, there's definitely civilizations on the moon in the past. And another fellow who showed up had been in the shuttle program, civilian astronaut, trained as a shuttle astronaut, never actually gone to space. But he told us about black triangles and all these reverse engineered, this is new stuff to me, reverse engineered craft from extraterrestrial vehicles. And so I started getting interested in some of these topics, just as sort of an outgrowth of the types of things you could view and the types of people you're around when you're involved with RV, because lots of people who show up at this training might have a lot of stories to share, and they feel comfortable in an RV type training group to share these stories over lunch and things like that. So I went to this UFO conference. I run into a guy named Ron Russell from the Denver area. He said, I'm giving tours. You could come with us. We don't know who's making these and what they mean. And we'll walk in them and see. So I thought, this is great. I'll get some feedback on my session. I don't have the actual session. I have it somewhere. I don't have it here for you tonight. But I was getting circles and energy and sort of ET type themes. So I was curious. So I went with Ron in 1997, the next year. And the first crop circle I saw was the one that we saw was called the Koch Fractal Snowflake by Silbury Hill. If you look carefully at the slide here, you can see there are little people in there. It was 300 feet across. And this was the Koch Snowflake, the very fractal I had studied in my dissertation. In the books I had seen it, they had often removed the center of it, and it would say, to save printer's ink, the center is blank. So here it was. I had seen it, this big in a book. All of a sudden, this same iterated shape, the Koch Snowflake, is here in a field, and it's next to Silbury Hill, the largest and oldest earth mound in Europe. It's a man-made earth mound, and this is right next to it. And it's based on this snowflake pattern where you just see you can keep iterating and adding more triangles onto each edge until it never resolves to a line, but it keeps getting more fractalized, the Koch Snowflake. And they had put the fractal dimension, the number of dots, whoever had made this, we didn't know back then who was doing this. The number of dots around it was the fractal dimension of the Koch Snowflake. I forgot what it was, 1 point something. That was the number of circles around it. So someone knew what they were doing. So that was my first circle. And then also a couple of weeks later here, it showed up in Milk Hill, a mile away, a mile or two away. Oh, there's all these white horses from the Celtic times that the Celts carved into these chalk hillsides. And there was the crop circle again. So for me, having studied fractals here, it's like, this is very interesting. Here I am, and these huge fractals. Those tram lines you see there are 80 feet across, which will give you a sense of how big that is. Now, one of the things that I immediately saw when I went over there, people were talking about battery and camera failure and strange effects around these crop circles. People were saying there were orbs seen around these crop circles, sometimes UFOs, and that you could encounter strange electromagnetic effects. I saw this just shortly after getting there, after hearing some of these stories, where we went to a formation called the Danebury Triad near Andover, and Ron's camcorder, he put it down without turning it off, and he picked it up. It was hot, never worked again the rest of the summer. When he sent it back to Sony, they said that the solder joints had melted by the transformer, the power transformer. Now, having worked in electronics as a kid, just building little kits and stuff with my paper route money, I knew it would take quite a bit of heat to melt the solder joints around a transformer. I mean, this is not going to happen under normal operation. And I began to see this from different people. It would happen to our own devices and so forth. Ron always had told this story that he had gone into this very simple circle by Silbury Hill and that his magnetic compass started spinning around like a motor. We had heard stories like this, and Ron had experienced it himself. So there was some sort of odd electromagnetism happening around crop circles. Also, weird sort of space-time experiences. I guess what you could call a time slip. That's really what it's called. He had been in this formation with a bunch of people by the town of Avebury near there. It's the only town in Europe that's surrounded by a stone circle, 5,000 years old stone circle, hinges going all the way around the town. And he had left this circle somewhere in there. His people were in there to go to his car to get more film. As he left, he encountered a group that he said was dressed in medieval garb, speaking an ancient type of English. And he felt like he had spent about an hour going to the car and coming back. But when he came back, the people in the circle said he'd only been gone for 5 minutes. So he was sort of baffled by this. And this is the sort of stories that you hear. Now, again, as a sociologist, I'm thinking, is this sort of folklore? The sociologists have different ways of dealing with stories like this. But again, with the compasses and electronics, this is verifiable. You could see the cameras and batteries stop working. And you had this accumulation of people having stories like space-time slips. We made a small formation coming back from the IRVA conference, International Remote Viewing Association, held in Austin in 2002. We had permission to make a small one in Kansas. None of our photos came out or in an ordinary way. Look at the strange lights in these. And this is a Nikon manual camera that did not leak light, professional quality camera, had never had a malfunction, never had another one again. But yet we make this formation, I'm measuring it with the static meter, and we get these weird lights. And I don't even know what this is. I mean, in the bottom left here, I'm standing there with a fellow named Steve who drove with us from the Denver area. It's like a 2-day trip. Texas is so big, so we drove across down to Austin. Well, I mean, it looks, it's like the shapes of our heads are kind of there, perpendicular. It's just really strange. This is the type of thing that you encounter around crop circles, for real. I'm not kidding. You see this again. I've been there maybe 20 times since 1997, maybe more. And I've seen this just about every year in one crop circle or another where you get these sort of, I don't even know what kind of anomaly this is. This is affecting physical film, but there's some energy there that's getting picked up by the film. Orbs are seen around crop circles. Here's one. We were actually on that hill right behind the arrow, Woodborough Hill. We were with a German researcher group too, Koch and Kaiberg. They like to make man-made circles to see if they could communicate with the intelligence that they believed was behind the crop circle phenomena. And crop circles go back hundreds of years. I mean, there's a great book by Terry Wilson called The Secret History of Crop Circles. He documents how these go way back before the 80s or 90s when they became popular. And they've always been rather strange. Koch and Kaiberg were making their own to see if they could get a response from whatever makes these in their mind. And a German tourist took a picture of that orb, which you can see. He saw this with his eye and he took a picture of it. And this is the sort of thing that you could see around crop circles. I saw one myself at a place called Knapp Hill. It was on the ground. Another person was there. We both saw it. It was only a few seconds, typical of ball lightning. Just 2 or 3 seconds. It looked like a glowing blue grapefruit, and poof, it's gone. We'll talk more about what I think this is in a moment. Here is Devil's Den, 5 field down. I saw 3 devices fail in a half hour from this shape. Now you see again, we have these sort of nested circles, very precise looking formation. And you can see these batteries from a GPS that just died instantly from the fellow who came in, Rob Spate, with brand new batteries. I saw it happen to my static meter. It was working. All of a sudden, it's just the scale's jumping around, then it's gone. And another fellow, Masao Maki from Boulder, who ran a sushi restaurant. Also, still that restaurant is still here in Boulder. But I didn't know him at the time. But I had met him over there in the UK, and we went to see this formation. We didn't know where this was. No one actually knew. We had to kind of walk through the downs, as they're called, the hills, for quite a while to find this. We had the replication. And his camcorder starts getting the dirty heads indicator, brand new Sony camcorder that take years to use it to get that error, but it happened immediately. So I saw all these errors happen immediately. And so again, the experience for me, the evidence is building up that there's something very odd in terms of the electromagnetic function of these circles. Now that is hard to explain. Wheat is normally an insulator. Now here you see it green, so there is water in it. It's simply a pattern impressed on the wheat, but it affects batteries, cameras, laptops, you name it. Here we were filming with the National Geographic channel, and they tell me, Silver Hill's behind us, we're across the A4 and the fields going up from Silver Hill. And they tell me that they knew that the BBC had a similar experience at Silver Hill, where their cameras crashed so badly. These are expensive beta cams that I'm told are quite expensive. They failed so badly, they had to call back to London for instructions how to reboot them. That's how badly the BBC's cameras had failed. So professional film crews experienced this. People on my tours experienced this. This is Pam.
Okay.
And
so Pam, what happened to your cameras?
She just described how she had a camera. This is back in the age of before phones. We used phones. In the view screen. And then it goes away. It just would die after it showed the picture in the view screen every time. And so it had never done that before. This was in a formation in Chutes Causeway. So it shows me the picture I've taken. But it would shut down. And this is sort of typical of what would happen to people in my tour group, which I had many tour groups after Ron had stopped doing them. I kind of took over the tours. And here's an electrical engineer from, I think, University of Oregon. And his compass stopped working on his wrist. Wouldn't point north anymore in the circle. So you get these electromagnetic effects. This is what your screen might look like after you've been in a crop circle. What is that? We don't know. This is quite strange. So this is something I could see for myself. This was not urban legend. This is not folklore. These were not stories that people like to invent around locations that they want to be supernatural. This was really happening. I could see it over and over again. I mean, you go to the beach, you go to the mountains, your cameras don't do this, but they do this around crop circles. So at that time, I was thinking, what could be responsible for this? I was looking into, I had a subscription to Science Magazine. One of my dissertation supervisors had recommended I get a subscription just for the sociology and the different sort of social science articles. But I was really interested in metamaterials. This is what really got me to read science after seeing this weird electromagnetic functioning around crop circles. I was wondering, well, what, metamaterials are materials that have these very fine structures like you can see in the picture here, where it becomes like a waveguide and it actually changes the frequency of energy. It changes it to other frequencies. In this example, it was an article about animals and life that uses metamaterials just naturally for types of protection, or the Morphos butterfly, which appears blue, but it's not because of a blue dye. It's because it's refracting light, so you only see blue. It's doing it with metamaterials, and it shows you what their wing structure looks like. kind of other insects use it for to deal with water. Insects have a way of dealing with water that could affect their flight. The metamaterial is what is it? Philic. It keeps the water off their wings to prevent, so they can keep flying, or antibacterial. So the only thing I kept thinking about that is, to refract light, you'd have to have a really small, fine detail. And I didn't think that just putting a crop circle there, regardless of how it formed, the wheat, would the structure of that refract light differently? Where would the energy be coming from to create these electromagnetic fields, which we could detect with the static meter, and obviously our technology could detect? And so with the idea of photonic crystals, you have to have a really small, micrometer spacing, or even smaller to affect light. So even though the structure of the crop circle might look like this with the pattern of the wheat and the way the seed driller had put the patterns, and the wheat's now on the ground and it can be interlaced, I didn't think it was small enough to refract light to create some of these anomalies that we experienced. But certainly the idea that the crop circle act like a waveguide seemed to be what was going on, regardless of who made it, because the ones that we made, and we would mostly pay the farmer. I did go out with some of the groups that did it illicitly, that didn't ask for permission, just to see if they could really do it. Because I'll tell you, back then in the late 90s, we didn't think people could do this, but I went out with them. I wrote about this in Opening Minds, and they did some pretty good ones to show me at night that they could do this. And we would pay the farmer sometimes and go out and make our own. In the Kansas Formation, you could see some strange effects on the film. They go back quite a ways. The Tully saucer nests in Australia, there were these flattened areas and reeds, and people saw flying discs over these areas. So even though my research showed that there were groups of people in the UK, and Doug and Dave really did make them. One of them came back from Australia, I think it was Doug Bauer, and was attempting to imitate the Tully saucer nest. This happened over a couple of years. He came to the UK and said, let's reproduce this in wheat. And Doug and Dave, the two guys from the pub, actually did make a lot of these, I'm convinced. And then other groups started taking over. These groups were artistic, graphic designers. They kind of liked the attention the media would pay to it. I mean, artists like attention. But they always felt there was something supernatural to it. They called it, to me, they always said it was type of natural magic or something like that. They knew about these effects because when the circle makers would go out, they would say they would have effects on their devices. Sometimes their lasers would stop working. That's how they get very straight lines. And they would see sometimes what they thought would be shadow people, dark life forms, occasionally very small UFOs. One of the circle making groups told me they saw, and this is before drones, small black triangles come right over the circle. Like, who would that be observing them? In one case, a group was chased out by balls of light. They went in, 3 20-year-old plus guys went in with boards and ropes to make it. And these lights came from each corner of the field that they initially thought were headlights of cars until they started coming over the wheat right at them, and they ran. So it's a little more complex than you would have thought. But the Tully saucer nest were really associated with flying discs. Now, in writing Black Swan Ghosts, when I began to encounter a lot more UFO witnesses just from being involved in these topics, I met a woman named Louise Voves from northern Idaho. And she had actually seen a flying disc with her brother. They were picking huckleberries near Usk, Washington. She said that this typical, falling leaf pattern discs kind of wobbling. Then all of a sudden she just said it left. That's the sound she made. She said it flattened the meadow. I said, Louise, how flat? She said, flat as a pancake. If you go to my channel, blackswanghost.com, you can click on the videos and you can listen to her testimony here. Her relatives really thank me for filming her because it's the only video they have of her. She's passed on now, and they can show it to the grandkids, grandma talking about UFOs. But this is a case where you do have UFOs from a witness who's very credible. You can watch the interview yourself, where she says it flattened the plants, meadows. It didn't make a crop circle, it made a line, but it's an example where the propulsion system of the UFO could actually flatten wheat. Here we are with Colin Andrews in one of the formations. His camera's affected. Now here's another interesting photo. A Japanese tourist took this picture. It's showing how the crop circle in the center is organizing pollen in a spiral. And that again indicates that the shape, and we'll get into this in a moment why this matters, the shape of the crop circle, the spiral form, can create effects on the physical environment. Okay. And it's physically affecting, it seems to me, you could have other interpretations, the pollen, and creating a sort of spiral vortex. Very interesting. They saw this with their eyes and they were okay with me putting it in opening minds. But this is the sort of things that you see around crop circles. So it's really the circle is creating an effect on the pollen or the swirling of the air. Very interesting. In this case, Colin Andrews was able to measure with a magnetometer a crop circle, and it had this strong magnetic pattern. It's not exactly matching the form of the circle. This is a Celtic cross around a Celtic dolmen. But you can see the overlay of the magnetic field flux sort of matches where the circles are. Now, Colin at the time and Jean-Noël Aubron, the French engineer that worked with him, thought there had to be magnets buried in the center of those circles. But Ron Russell and I went to this town of Milton Hill Farms. We walked around and we found people that knew something about this circle. And we eventually talked to all 5 people who had made it. Okay, so some of the circles, these big ones, are made by groups of people, in my view. But you can still see it creates these strange magnetic effects. They didn't plant magnets there. This is an effect of the change in the magnetic field from having a swirled circular pattern in the wheat. Okay, it's a pure effect there. And again, quite interesting that crop circles have these effects. Even the ones made, ones made by people. If it's a UFO that makes it, you're thinking, what could do, it's a propulsion system. But when people do it, well, it's the shape, in my view. And you get these orbs. There's another one from Barbary Castle in 1999 that a tourist saw. And when this was moving, this orb, I went back there to take measurements of the distance. It was going about 200 miles an hour. That's a lot faster than any bird I know about in the UK that's going horizontally can fly. And then you do get some of these that really don't seem to be made by people or even a UFO. This seems to be possibly made by a plasma or something like that. You see the radial lay splayed out from the center. And so this is very interesting that some of them do seem to be made either by plasmas or blasts of air or something. So the point is there are a lot of different causes of crop circles, as I found out over 2 decades, but a lot of them are electronically active. Again, in wheat, an insulator, very interesting how an insulator could become a conductor like that or generate some sort of field that affects you and your electronics. So my idea that I came up with a couple of years after this, maybe what would the energy be that they're organizing? If it could organize that pollen and affect our electronics, perhaps it was organizing dark energy. And I put this little article together. It's kind of an abstract on ResearchGate. That maybe it was dark energy that was being lensed by the swirling pattern. In some of them, I estimate maybe 5% of the circles that we've encountered had this active electronic effects. And that would have been the energy that we were encountering, dark energy. I don't think that's 100% accurate. As I'm about to show you, I actually think it's dark matter, and I think we have a lot of evidence how dark matter can get lensed. Dark matter from the cosmos being lensed by objects on Earth. Andrew Collins, an author, documented a couple cases, the Ray Barnes case, where a bicycle mechanic was around when he saw some small crop circles forming, again, perhaps by plasmas. Plasmas can be invisible, as we'll find out. But then around his home, he began to encounter what we call supernatural phenomena, seemingly haunted events and other strange phenomena in his house, kind of like the hitchhiker effect that James Lukatsky described in Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. That book that came out last year is a fascinating book that talks about these sort of encounters you have in these sort of hotspots. And there was another case of the Day family that was driving along east of London and encountered balls of light on the road and some glowing mists. And they had years of just the strangest encounters with entities they felt were coming into the home. They changed careers. They felt like their lives had new purposes. They had what we would call supernatural events happen around the home after their encounter with balls of light. Why? So in the book Skinwalkers at the Pentagon and the original book Hunt for the Skinwalker by Keller and Knapp and Skinwalkers at the Pentagon is the follow-up. We learned that these sites, again, going back to the conversation Eric and I had just before all of you joined us, you can't separate these phenomena out easily from the nuts and bolts, even if your mind would like to do that. And my mind initially was like that too. Where you have these orbs showing up, you often have cryptids, you have energy anomalies and this hitchhiker effect. And I found it fascinating that Katsky, who's working for the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, is a missile analyst, he reads this Hunt for the Skinwalker and thinks, well, maybe there's something that could be valuable to intelligence, for a defense point of view. We should go look at skinwalkers. And they encounter all these sorts of phenomena, dark shapes, on the path that inspire huge amounts of fear, various types of cryptids, orbs. And then when they go home, the analysts experience this again in their suburbs of Maryland, including what we call dogman, werewolves. Not only did the analysts experience this, their families who they hadn't talked to necessarily about it experienced it, and the neighbors. Hitchhiker effect or resonance. We can talk about this. But anyway, this is some of the research. The Hunt for the Skinwalker sort of started it all off, that you have areas, and it's not just Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. That's what we're talking about here. You had it in Elbert County, Colorado, not far from here, where I'm broadcasting from. You had it in the Cascades, Washington, the Isetti Ranch, Yakima India Reservation, Marley Woods in Missouri, same thing. You get all of it happening together. The ball lightning, the cryptids, the UFOs, the strange effects on batteries. You can watch this on The Secret of Skinwalker on TV. And they often talk, you see them go out with these batteries, they bring out specialists, and batteries are all gone. Now, I've seen this at crop circles myself. I'm going to argue tonight, I think it's the same phenomena. You don't have to agree, but I'm going to present my case why I think it's the same factors that are affecting batteries and cameras and so forth. Again, the NICAP report from the 60s, and just an excellent report from NICAP from Donald Kehoe and Gordon Lohr. About 100 cases, if I remember correctly. I've gone through this a couple times. Same sort of phenomena, not exactly the same. They're occupants here that get out of their craft and so forth. You've probably seen this publication, or you should look at it if you haven't. But it's the same phenomena we're talking about here. Cars stalling, batteries not working, strange luminosities that are left behind after the craft leave the area. What's that? What's going on with that? Orbs, space-time slips, missing time. It seems to me a lot of the same sort of phenomena that we've seen around crop circles have been seen around Skinwalker Ranch and other areas like that. So what are some of the cosmological factors that could come into play here? There's been a lot of research in the former Soviet Union, Russia, into dark energy, dark matter, and what's called relic neutrinos. This is an excellent book, Space, Earth, Human, that lays out this perspective. Now, Dr. Alexander Parkhomov was a real heavyweight in the Soviet nuclear atomic program. He also, as I found out, worked in their remote viewing program, which I don't think is a coincidence. And he was able to develop from Soviet surplus equipment a telescope that was able to detect relic neutrinos. Now, relic neutrinos are from the original Big Bang, just a couple seconds after the Big Bang. They can be detected. They're not electromagnetically interactive with us, but they're different than solar neutrinos, which you're probably familiar with. Solar neutrinos are very small and very fast and go through pretty much anything they encounter without interacting with them because they're so small. And you've heard this before, that there's like 1 billion going through your hand every second, but they never touch anything. They'd have to go for 10 light years in lead. Not so of relic neutrinos. They're called low energy, they're slow, they're big, and as you can see from this diagram in the upper left, they interact with matter at our scale, the mesoscopic scale as it's referred to. They are well above the atomic scale. They can interact with molecules, they can interact with cells. Their de Broglie wavelength is such, and their density is such in the universe that they interact with living things. And Parkhomov was able to create this telescope where he detected very interesting shifts in the relic neutrino flux based on the time of year and the position of the sun and the moon, which led him to believe that these get gravitationally lensed by large solar objects like the sun or the moon. And that's why you get variation. You get more of them, I think, in the early parts of the year, less towards the summer, repeated year after year. Now, this affects beta radioactive decay rates, which according to physics shouldn't happen, but Parkhomov has been able to show over and over that you get this effect on radioactive decay, which has no explanation. It affects plant growth rates and other biological processes based on time of year. This is not something that's coming from the sun, or it would happen as the Earth rotates at night. And it's something that happens based on the calendar, or based on the position of the Earth relative to the Milky Way and the rest of the cosmos. So this is a type of energy that has variation, neutrinos coming in from the cosmos. And we'll learn in a second why this is so important. Parkhomov also found that substances like relic neutrinos are not, they clump in a nonlinear way because they're gravitational. They're one very small component of dark matter. We don't know what the rest of dark matter is, but the estimates, dark matter being the mass of material out in the universe that outnumbers physical, visible material by 10 to 1. Discovered or theorized 100 years ago, Fritz Zwicky at the University of Chicago. They just found that there wasn't enough material in galaxies to prevent them from spinning apart, yet they hold together. It's what holds galaxies together. They're the rotational rates and so forth. And so relic neutrinos are thought to be a very small component of dark matter. The amount of visible matter as a percentage of the whole universe, in case you're wondering, is about 0.5%. Even physical matter, a lot of it's non-baryonic, which means it doesn't interact with light. And that's a couple percent right there. The visible baryonic matter, that's us, and everything you see around you and everything you see out in the sky, that's 0.5%, maybe 25% dark matter, 68% dark energy, and more even unknown quantity that causes cosmological expansion. So you saw that slide where I said in the past maybe crop circles were focusing dark energy. I think they're focusing these relic neutrinos. There's a lot of evidence that shapes can affect the flux of neutrinos. And Parkhomov created this idea of flicker noise, which is what? Fractal time, fractal noise. That we're used to a world where if you want a large effect, you need a large cause, right? You know, you want to cause a big effect, what do? Going on in our world right now, you bomb it. And that's going to somehow make a big effect. Well, flicker noise is the opposite. It's more like avalanches. A small effect can create a large outcome. In an avalanche situation, it's not the initial size of the signal, as Nikola Tesla found out. It's resonance, right? You get the right frequency, you start the snowball rolling. Apparently, this is the thing that Tesla saw that got him interested in frequency and vibration, is that a small snowball rolling down the hill can become a bigger snowball, can become a bigger snowball, and so forth, if the conditions are right. And this is what Parkhomov found with his work with relic neutrinos and what we've called in the past cold fusion, low energy nuclear reaction, which we'll describe in a second. And so phenomena like this are much more like 1 over F spectra, like music, like fractals. Chaos theory, this is what chaos theory says, the butterfly effect. You've all heard this, right? A butterfly flapping its wings over the Amazon can affect the entire climate of the planet, the weather of the planet. Small causes can create big effects. That's flicker noise. And these phenomena are much more modeled around flicker noise. Again, not the linear large causes equal large effects like we're used to. And so these relic neutrinos are quite fascinating, and it's something that NASA has looked at, CERN laboratory, in terms of the gravitational effects, the relationship to dark matter, and the fact that there's these cosmological changes over the course of the year. Now, there is something that we know about this that's very familiar in remote viewing. It's called sidereal time. And this was found a number of years ago. I didn't actually believe in it until Ed May, one of the directors of SRI, held up the graph at one of the remote viewing meetings. And he showed us that there are times of day when people do better remote viewing and times when they do worse. And it's when sidereal time is the location of the Earth relative to the Milky Way. When the Earth you're facing in towards the center of the Milky Way, the idea is there's a lot more energy coming to you. When you're on the dark side of the Earth, you're getting shielded by the Earth. it would shield dark matter and relic neutrinos. And this has a measurable outcome on your remote viewing effectiveness. Quite interesting. So that's some sort of connection there between sidereal time and these cosmological factors. There's more evidence from Maurice Elias, a sort of polymath who actually won a Nobel Prize in economics, but he worked for NASA, and you might have heard about the pendulum effect. He found during eclipses that pendulums would act strangely and differently by about 35% during the course of the eclipse. And there wasn't enough solar mass from the sun or the moon to explain this. The explanation being that, again, the position of the sun and the earth is lensing these relic neutrinos. And again, the pendulum experiments. Again, I think there was another fellow I just learned about yesterday, Dayton Miller, in the 50s that reproduced this, the pendulum effect. So this would be the idea of the Michelson-Morley ether. This is sort of the idea that there is an ether. It's not like a wind or anything like this. It's a very low density flux of cosmic particles. It's a small component of dark matter. The amount of material that dwarfs visible matter 10 to 1, okay? It's an ether-like idea, and it seems that it has measurements. Now, models of dark matter, that if you look at them, it looks like a web, kind of like a mycelial network, like Star Trek. The most recent versions of Star Trek have talked about this mycelial network. They even have a spore drive that's based on mycelial network. It looks like dark matter. This is what the universe would look like if you could see the dark matter. Why does it look web-like? Because it's gravitationally lensed. It clusters together. We know this about the relic neutrinos. They tend to cluster. It's a gravitational effect. They tend to attract each other. When we look out, we see separate galaxies and stars and plasmas and so forth. But this is what it would look like if you could see the dark matter component of it. Now, here's an interesting aspect of this that plays into it. You've maybe heard of Paralabs at Princeton Engineering Anomaly Labs. They did these they looked at psychokinesis, and what they found is that humans, you and me, can affect a random number generator to the tune of 2 to 3 events per 10,000, without a shadow of a doubt. Highly statistically significant. It's a small effect, but it's very significant. You could make a random number generator go more towards 1 or more towards 0, as this graph shows. And the chances of this, after the hundreds of thousands of experiments they did over 20 years, are like billions to 1 that just is by chance. The red line is the person making it, making the random number generator. It's called micro PK, not bending a spoon. It's affecting electronics. It appears that the relic neutrinos that we interact with them, there's like a slight force that comes from them. We re-emit this sort of same energy. It's called cold neutrinos just because it's relatively slow compared to the solar neutrinos. We actually emit these neutrinos. I'm going to show you some evidence in that in a moment. And this is one of the explanations for psychokinesis in PK. Now, here's the thing I wanted to tell you that's so interesting. They found that bonded couples, pairs, people that are in relationships, have a bigger effect on the machine than single people. Interesting. It's like there's a type of coherency between people that are in resonance with each other that amplifies the effect, the PK, micro PK effect. And that would make sense if we're sort of emitting a type of neutrino energy. Now, Boyd Bushman, formerly of Lockheed Martin, said exactly the same thing, that there's another universe, the neutrino universe. It's like people have known about this for a while. You and I didn't know about it, but the defense contractors were working on this. I'll show you some of their patents in a moment about dark energy and neutrinos and so forth. It's 70% dark energy. And Boyd Bushman said that you could harness the energy of these neutrinos, and these are sort of links to a whole nother universe, dark matter universe, right? So a lot of people have made reference to this. So what is the evidence that this fractal nature of it actually is a fundamental characteristic of the entire universe, not just of nature that we see at our scale? Well, part of it goes back to Winston Bostick, a researcher that did work for the Department of Energy, and he found that in test tubes you could recreate what galaxies look like if you took plasmas and put them in a magnetic field. He was working to attempt to make, after the Manhattan Project, to do something with atomic energy for peaceful purposes. And he found that you could create a propulsion system, kind of like Boyd Bushman actually was working on the same idea. Boyd Bushman said that you could take this neutrino dark matter mass and use it to get to Mars in a couple days. And this is what Bostic was working on too. I mean, this is what Bostic was working on, is this propulsion system. But Boyd Bushman had some patents, by the way, I think around 2017, in propulsion based on neutrinos and this sort of same force, right? So Bostic, there was a New York Times article about him, creates test tube galaxies. These are plasmas that are in a magnetic field. Now, the types of matter you and I are familiar with, we're familiar with solids, right? We all learned this in chemistry classes. Liquids, gases. But the most common type of matter in the universe are these plasmas. Ionized glowing gases, fluorescent bulbs, lightning, aurora borealis, and all of these charged gases that are out there in the universe make up the bulk of matter. That is the fourth state of matter. It's something that Nikola Tesla was really interested in. Bostic was interested in showing that the same forces in a test tube are creating these spiral barred galaxies. It's the same thing, whether it's at the largest scale or the smallest scale. The next step after plasmas, if you put them in a magnetic confinement field, is they become a coherent condensate, the fifth state of matter. Coherent matter. And this is what Bostic was playing around with. This is similar to what Tesla was doing, though Bostic was using different equipment. He created these galaxy-like shapes. Kenneth Shoulders, who worked with Hal Puthoff at SRI, I think he worked in the RV program, though I haven't been able to confirm that directly with people that worked there. He started investigating this whole area, and he wrote this very influential book called EV: A Tale of Discovery. It's about coherent matter, charge clusters, and what he called exotic vacuum objects. If you take these plasmas and you confine them and compress them, they become a whole nother state of matter, ball lightning. And just like Winston Bostic was saying that these galaxies are the same as what you see in a test tube, it's the same sort of pattern that makes them form, what Shoulders found was that if you compress matter enough, you get these little charge clusters that he eventually called exotic vacuum objects that make direct contact with the quantum vacuum field, that have a life of their own. They can move through solid objects. They can have a tiny scale and a microscopic scale, micro ball lightning. They can form large ball lightnings, which we'll show examples of in a moment. And he really felt that these exotic vacuum objects were an explanation for what Tesla was doing and another inventor, John Hutchinson in Canada. That basically these exotic vacuum objects could transmute materials at room temperature and create these quantum coherent effects, including teleportation, cloaking, and invisibility. And he could simulate this. He did it many times. This is an example of an exotic vacuum object as it's coming apart. He said very interestingly that they had a dark mode, and that in the dark mode, when they're invisible, they could contact dark matter. And often when they would tunnel through materials, these exotic vacuum objects, even after you turn the experiment off, these little glowing objects, not glowing from heat, they're glowing from quantum coherency. I'll explain it a little more just in a second what that is. They would form these fractal patterns, they call them strange tracks, through materials. You could see where they had moved. And what does this look like? Just like our fractal objects that we were talking about before. A very fundamental aspect of the universe, and that so much of the universe was actually interacting with these exotic vacuum objects. And they form these circular patterns of alternating magnetic and electrical energy, these chains of exotic vacuum objects. They often look circular, and they leave these patterns in materials that they move through. This is a micro ball lightning. So what Ken Shoulders said was that these exotic vacuum objects have a blacker state where you don't see them anymore, but they interact with this other dark matter universe. And he actually says this at some point in this EVO: A Tale of Discovery, that you could say that the much touted dark matter regime dominates ordinary matter by a huge factor. And this is what exotic vacuum objects, you can only see them with an electron scanning microscope a lot of the time, unless they're larger, like the type I saw at Knapp Hill, small balls of light and so forth. but often they're at a microscopic scale. You only see them after they've left in effect. They transmute materials. Guess what else? They also cause batteries shorting out, electronics failure. These EVOs do not play nice with electronics. They have their own rules. They create their own type of electricity called cold electricity. And basically, Shoulders was able to provide a scientific basis for a lot of what Nikola Tesla was talking about, which for us at the time might not have been clear. I mean, when Tesla was doing his work, a lot of physics hadn't even been invented. I don't even think the electron had been seen when Tesla was doing his original research. And most importantly, what Ken Shoulders said is that these exotic vacuum objects, these charge clusters, as you could call them, just dense clusters of electrons that because of the pressure start having the same frequency, the same temperature, same resonance, actually affect the structure of space-time itself. What's called permittivity and permeability. Permittivity is the electrical capacitance of space-time, and permeability is the magnetic component. And he said these black EVs, these dark exotic vacuum objects, which you can't see with the naked eye, but you can see later on when they've moved through a metal material or something like this, changed the permittivity of space-time, created their own type of current flow, which may have been what we've seen in crop circles. Again, they create their own sort of autonomous electrical flow. They create their own gravitational fields. They change the permittivity of the area they're in, which would change the speed of light. They create their own type of quantum entanglement, and they interact with biological organisms. He argues here, even in this abstract, and I won't go into this too much, but it's just interesting, thinking about some of the phenomena that you and I are all interested in. They can kind of create a chain where an organism could be made out of these exotic vacuum objects. And again, they affect the structure of spacetime. Now, Shoulders was actually investigating, the whole thing was to look at John Hutchinson, who had created these fractured metal samples at room temperature. Hutchinson was just recreating Nikola Tesla's technology, not with these huge pulse discharge tubes. Remember, Tesla stuff is always this huge stuff in transformers. You remember him blowing out the transformers in Colorado Springs. Again, you would use somewhere high elevation, dry. It's good for that sort of research. He did it in New York City too. He blew out some of the transformers with these apparently exotic vacuum objects. Hutchinson reproduced this, not with this huge equipment, but with smaller microwave equipment, and created these so-called fractured metal samples at room temperature. This is not created from heating. It's created from microwaves and intense magnetism. It's not PK. This is something that if anyone reproduced the equipment would get the same effect. This metal, when it starts to melt, you can touch it. It's not hot. It's in a quantum coherent state so that it becomes malleable. You would have other types of metal like this penny embedded in these metal structures. And this seems to be a type of quantum coherent matter based on everything we know about. And this is what Shoulders said. Shoulders was investigating Bostic and Hutchinson, and this is what he concluded. It's exotic vacuum objects. Room temperature transmutation, a type of alchemy. When you look at the Hutchinson fracture samples, and again, these slides are from Bob Grenier, Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. You can watch their YouTube channel. Bob has talked extensively. He's done many hours of video about all this. You can see these sort of waveforms in this metal. This isn't from heating. It wouldn't look like this from heating. This is quantum wave structure at an electron microscope. You can see the sort of the structure of it. It's just fascinating. The shapes that it looks like, and new elements show up in there and so forth. Now it gets even more interesting. Another researcher was Takeaki Matsumoto, a Japanese researcher, University of Hokkaido in Sapporo. He tries to reproduce the Fleischmann and Pons cold fusion experiments from University of Utah. You remember those two researchers? They claim they've had cold fusion. The university wants the patent, so they have this press conference. Martin Fleischmann said he didn't want a press conference. University bigwigs want a press conference. And they can't kind of explain the results. They call it cold fusion, even though now we know it's not really fusion. It's these charge clusters. But at the time, it was thought to be neutrons fusing at room temperature, which is not what it is. And this is justifies some of the skepticism. What Matsumoto found is that it, just like Shoulders, it's created by these charge clusters. He called them itonic clusters. Charges of what? Electrons and neutrinos. The neutrinos we were talking about a few minutes ago. And he said he could find evidence of microscopic black holes in his samples. I don't have the book with me. You can find this online. It's just been published, all this paper, Steps to the Discovery of Electronuclear Collapse. This is what cold fusion is, folks. It's electronuclear collapse. It's when you get the clusters of charges. You're not talking about Coulombic repulsion. We're all taught that like charges repel. When they're really close, it forms a huge attractive force that collapses matter, collapses gravity, and creates things like this, micro black holes. These are not dangerous. Don't worry that these are going to eat up the solar system like we've thought those experiments from the particle accelerator like CERN could do. These are just contained by the structure they're in. But these are the remnants of the black holes. And Matsumoto was able to show the most fascinating things. You get these charge clusters. They have a white mode and a black mode like Shoulders found, and that this is literally a form of micro ball lightning. You can get it from hydrogen clusters, you could get it from electrons, but you end up creating, again, what we were talking about with Bostic, the fractal nature of the universe, as above, so below. You get micro black holes. You get micro wormholes. That what we call cold fusion is actually the same thing that's going on in neutron stars, which is what? Collapsed stars, gravitational collapse, and in black holes, which is something that was a kind of an outcome of Einstein's relativity theory. So again, dark matter, believe it or not, is created in these micro black holes. And again, this is not like philosophical speculation. If you go through Matsumoto's papers, and I've looked through many of these, and he's still alive, by the way, it's all from experimental research with his electron scanning microscope. He also mentioned seeing crop circles form after thunderstorms in the Sapporo area from what he thought at the time were plasmas. So he even mentions crop circles in some of this work, just being seen around the fields near the university. But again, Matsumoto, he's banned from publishing for a while in the US because mentioning ball lightning. That was somehow a forbidden topic, and the American Nuclear Society Fusion Technology magazine didn't allow him to publish, I believe, after 93 or so, because just mentioning ball lightning, it's like the stigma. So again, here's another researcher into these phenomena that says it's a type of gravitational collapse. What you see out in the cosmos is the same thing going on here. And these relic neutrinos, the neutrinos are actually a component of this low energy nuclear reaction process. They are what's giving extra energy to the process that makes it autocatalytic, self-sustaining, and so forth. As he says here, 40 times stronger than ordinary electromagnetic forces that we're used to. When you have these types of collapses, this is one of Matsumoto's electron microscope photos, you actually have chemical transmutation where something like a lead ball can be emitting carbon mist. This is what you see here from the smallest microscopic scale. Pure lead is now, when it's been subject to this type of electronuclear collapse, is now been transmuted into carbon. Mark Leclerc found the same thing in his cavitation experiments. Another way to generate compression is with sonic cavitation, right? Sonic waves. You're probably familiar with these sonic waves, whether you use it in like a toothbrush or a sonic cleaner. All these are using cavitation sonic waves. If you really pump it up a little bit, you can start getting all the elements in the periodic table. It starts to coalesce around lead. Now, if you keep pushing it, you will end up with heavy elements that are radioactive. You shouldn't do this. We don't want this happening. But people who've done this, I have to say, Mark Leclerc included, got cancer. They pushed these so-called cold cavitation experiments too far. You end up creating these different elements that are, again, not in the original material. You get these crop circle-like patterns in some of these low-energy nuclear Leonard experiments, cold fusion experiments. I mean, this is Michael Solin's patent, which the patent office rejected, I believe, in the early 90s. Looks like crop circle patterns, doesn't it? At a microscopic scale. Exactly what Matsumoto is saying is that it's really the same forces at a microscopic or a macroscopic scale. And Bob Greenyer was able, just from looking at some of this evidence, to reproduce what these EVOs look like. They're toroidal forms, fractal toroidal forms. What do we mean by that? It's rings within rings within rings. This object you see, the reason why we would call it a phantom, and this is seen from the Hutchinson metal fracture samples and so forth, after it's moved through the metal, you see a pattern that looks like this. It's a larger ring with smaller rings going around in the so-called poloidal around the edge, around the circle towards the center again. And then on that circle, you have smaller rings, a fractal phantom toroid. It's sort of not really there, just like we were talking about the coastline of England, depends on the scale of your measurement. It's sort of there and it's sort of space. And this is why it's called a fractal phantom toroid. Now, this is apparently what ball lightning is you get these charge clusters or hydrogen clusters, and if they keep growing and keep clustering, they become macroscopic sized and they like to go down chimneys, carbon. They can move through airplanes. There are many researchers, and I've read many books about ball lightning now. I know someone was talking about this when we started because your mic was on your side. Ball. It is a fascinating subject. Ball lightning is not hot. It can boil water, but if you are next to it, it can be cool to the touch because it's a quantum coherent object. It's not physically burning. And it can move through things without destroying, or it can also explode at the end and do all sorts of strange things. It's been seen for hundreds of years. It can move through windows. It can move through metal. And again, the metal is malleable for a while. Yes. Okay. Here are some ball lightning studies over the years. Excuse me. Here are some ball lightning studies over the years. And you can look these up. Walter Brand did a fascinating study in 23. I learned this from reading Vladimir Bychkov's work, a Russian researcher. And there's many researchers, George Eagley from Hungary. Anyway, this is like UFO research, like you're all familiar with. There's a whole lineage of ball lightning researchers predating Tesla. Okay, that we haven't heard about. I don't know why exactly. It's a whole nother lineage of science having to do with this coherent matter, quantum coherent phenomena. Obviously, 100 years ago, they didn't know what quantum coherent phenomena would be, but we understand this now. And George Eagley documented a whole bunch of researchers predating Tesla, but World War I, apparently, there were a lot of fatalities. It was disruptive, and we forgot about a lot of this research. So it's almost like something that started up and we forgot about. But now it's starting to come together. David Freiberger from Stanford, he said that ball lightning essentially is when you get electromagnetic fields that are just in an alternative arrangement. He called it a vorton. And he said that's what creates ball lightning. It's sort of closed pointing vectors. Normally in electromagnetics, you have a magnetic field and an electric field at 90 degrees. Freiberger said, and they call this a diality angle, but don't get too caught up in the jargon of it. If there are different angles, you're going to get different properties, different space-time properties. He called it a vorton. And what does it look like? This sort of fractal torus that we saw, the fractal phantom toroid, same sort of thing. Different language for it, but he said this is what creates ball lightning, are these intense magnetic charges. Closed pointing vectors, which do what? Directs the energy in, not out. In many of these cases of ball lightning, if it goes by you or metal, it'll magnetically charge the material unbelievably. Even non-magnetic materials will be magnetic. And UFOs researchers have found this over trees and things which have become temporarily magnetic. This is what ball lightning will do if it's around you, but only if it's really close. Otherwise, you won't even detect it. You won't detect it on an EM meter or anything like this. But if you're close to it, you'll start these fields will affect you. It's in the potential, the Aronov-Bohm effect. All these researchers are basically saying the same sort of thing. This is John Archibald Wheeler, a mainstay of the Manhattan Project, a graduate student to many famous physicists, Richard Feynman, Hugh Everett, the guy that created the idea of many worlds, parallel realities. I just met someone recently who said their brother John Wheeler was their graduate advisor. Back in the 50s, he creates this, look at the same pattern. He called it a GEON, gravitational electromagnetic entity. And he said, this is partly funded by the U.S. Air Force. He was connected to the defense establishment, creates gravity. right through the center of this toroid shape. Gravity at a microscopic scale. Now, I mentioned the idea of coherent matter. The first idea of this starts with Einstein and Satyendra Bose in 1925. Bose writes to, an Indian physicist writes to Einstein, says, we can derive some of the physics activity we see completely from quantum principles. We don't need classical physics to explain some of these particular phenomena. And Einstein agrees, and they start working together, and they create this idea that based on quantum mechanics, the idea that matter has a wave function. If you keep lowering the energy, the individual particles lose their identity and become one big particle, the Bose-Einstein condensate. It isn't seen until 1995, not far from here at NIST, National Institute for Standards, in their Boulder, University of Colorado facility, the so-called Bose-Einstein condensate. Now, the Bose-Einstein condensate can only take place at near absolute zero. It's very fragile. Even so, physicists have created these larger molecules of Bose-Einstein condensates. Just recently, very proud of it. But again, what does that sort of look like to you when you see that? It looks to me like John Wheeler's Gion, Freiberger's, Vorton. It's all the same sort of structure. It's this sort of toroidal structure. Now, the really interesting thing about this is that you don't need absolute zero to create this coherent matter. Coherent matter being that all the atoms are so closely aligned, they just become one atom. They don't differentiate anymore. Like you see around you right now, different colors and shapes, that's differentiated matter. Coherent matter is when it's all at the same frequency and temperature. But Lockheed Martin, in their patent, which was granted just last year, though it took the patent office 10 years, created a patent for coherent matter wave beams. For what? Cloaking and teleportation and invisibility. And what do they say in here? You can do it at room temperature. You don't need Bose-Einstein condensate. You could create matter that can teleport, that can become invisible, that can cloak, all from this spooky quantum principle called Aharonov-Bohm. Aharonov-Bohm principle is the idea that just from quantum potentials that are just in the math of the quantum wave function, you can manipulate matter. You don't have to do it with physical force. You can do it with what? Frequency, with resonance. This is the Lockheed Martin patent. So if anyone thinks that this is some quantum woo-woo or something, like I often hear, it's woo-woo, well, yeah, maybe, but if you're a defense contractor, it's awfully good patent to get. And now all of a sudden it's, real science, right? There they say, coherence, resonance. I wasn't making this up, folks. RV. It's based, all these topics we're talking about are based on resonance and the Aharonov-Bohm effect. And these toroidal shapes, which we'll see in a moment why they're so important. Recently, in the different podcasts and YouTube channels, you saw John Ramirez, formerly from the CIA, talking about some of these phenomena. The CIA had noticed these strange effects around Soviet missile launches. I'm sure you're familiar with this. Tom Bearden talked about this as being possibly types of scalar weapons. Glowing spheres and so forth all over the world. Strange changes in temperature could be the Aharonov-Bohm effect, that the Soviets had figured out how to do this Lockheed-type patent, coherent matter waves. It's a way of affecting things at a distance with frequency and resonance, not with direct action. If we had time, you could see this right in the Lockheed Martin patent. What Ramirez said, and this was so amazing to me, and he was on John Greenwald, Black Vault, all these different podcasts, is that when the CIA and the other intelligence agencies were looking through the keyhole satellites, they saw these plasmas and UFOs coming into our atmosphere at the same time. You found these strange luminous effects near Soviet missile tests. Their conclusion at CIA is this was extraterrestrial. This isn't something that's being created by the Soviets hadn't discovered some secret anti-ballistic defense system. This was extraterrestrials doing surveillance of these missile tests. And Ramirez went on to say that there were two classified programs he knew about, one in UFOs and the other in Orbs. Yes, Orbs. They had concluded that UFOs have an alternative matter state that they call dark stealth plasma or dark plasma. Sound familiar? We've been looking at this in terms of dark matter and these other researchers we talked, that it has a dark mode that you won't see it. The satellites can see it because they can detect a lot of different spectrum, a lot of different frequencies. But Ramirez called it stealth plasma, and he said the CIA concluded he wasn't in these programs. He didn't want to go through getting the clearance, but his people in his signal intelligence unit were given clearance. And when they came back, Ramirez said, they pointed to his little figure of a gray or something, ET on his desk. All they could say, since they were part of this classified program, is everything you told us, John, was true. So we can only guess what they heard about. But the point is, it's connected to these plasmas and to these orbs, and this is one component of UFOs. It's not all nuts and bolts. This is what the CIA is telling us, is that these nuts and bolts UFOs have an alternate dark matter state, stealth mode, whatever you want to call it, okay? You don't see it, but it's there. It's there. And so what you end up with here is the idea of fractal electromagnetics. And we learned about this from these Soviet papers of these now deceased authors, V.E. Zverbelis and his friend Nevesky. Zverbelis got access to a classified Soviet program. He went into this basement in Moscow and saw this device that it looked sort of like shaped like this, he said. When you turned it off, the glow of a toroidal shape would still be on the tabletop for 2 days after you removed the equipment. A fractal phantom toroid. He didn't believe it at first. He thought it was a hoax. And more surprisingly, he couldn't get anyone interested who he told he had seen this to. He actually left the demonstration. He felt bad that he did that because he thought he was being fooled. But he consulted people, looked in the research, and found if you have, again, exactly what Freiberger is telling us from Stanford and other researchers, if you have these toroidal shapes and you keep fractalizing them, put more rings on and more rings, you have alternating electric and magnetic fields. But they're not pointing outward like the wires we're used to that's enabling our internet and our Zoom call right now. It's not transmitting. It's going down to 0 point, the quantum vacuum, or what people have called the Diracs. It used to be called the Dirac after Paul Dirac speculated that there was a mirrorverse of antiparticles, right? And that was called the Dirac sea, just kind of a vacuum of potential. Zverbelis and Nevesky found that if you took this form and you kept putting more rings around of alternating electromagnetic, you would end up with this fractal toroidal shape, which would create ball lightning, very odd electromagnetic effects, and it would go all the way, it literally tap the 0 point field, the quantum vacuum, the Dirac sea. And this is why you would have persistent glowing shapes after the experiment was turned off for 2 days. You would still have this glow. He said if you ran your hand across it, you could wipe it off the table. It would like fall off the table and dissolve. Just really strange. And this is Soviet classified research that we now know about because the Soviet Union's not there anymore. And what shape did you think they said? They said there was one shape in the universe that would create this fractal phantom toroid. One shape. And you can probably guess what it is. The Koch snowflake. Koch snowflake, fractal snowflake. So this pattern that I saw in crop circles years ago, and I studied in my dissertation, actually happens to be one of the most important shapes in the universe for tapping quantum fields, creating orbs and ball lightning, aka coherent matter. And I had my artist create a version of this just for dark matter monsters. Fractal Maxwellian electromagnetic fields. Don't think about it. It's not too complicated. If you actually made this physically, it would be spiral wrapped wires and kind of a couple more wires wrapped around them. Nevesky and Zverbelis said, Nevesky being the mathematician that figured this out, if you had 3 orders of these coiling wires, you could create these phantom electromagnetic phantoms. They called it electromagnetic phantoms. And to me, these electromagnetic phantoms sound a lot like these phenomena that we call paranormal and supernatural. And so forth, okay? That's just my view of it. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about electromagnetic phantoms because they can be generated from a dark state. They can persist with no apparent wires because they're tapping into the quantum field. And also, the sheer pressure of it is creating condensed matter, which leads to more orbs. which is what would create a kind of self-sustaining autocatalytic process that Takeaki Matsumoto talked about, Ken Shoulders, self-sustaining ball lightning that would create its own gravitational collapse. And what Matsumoto said is that creates dark matter. It's absorbing these relic neutrinos. By the way, this is how it all fits in. Alexander Parkhomov said that he could lens these relic neutrinos with his relic neutrino telescope, like a dish-shaped device, and actually channel it into cold fusion, channel the neutrinos, the relic neutrinos, into cold fusion experiments. Parkhomov was able to keep his reactor going for 225 days with no external energy input. A cold fusion, that's what we call it, low energy nuclear reaction, going for 225 days. Now, interestingly enough, Google attempted to reproduce this just recently, and they couldn't do it. And they won't share their data, as Google often is wont to do. They won't share their results because they say we're a private company. We don't have to share results with the public. So we don't know what they did wrong. But Parkhomov was able to sustain it. Google couldn't do it. You really have to know what you're doing with this. And maybe it's just the type of resonance. Who knows? In any case, this is what you end up with is these it's called also a hypertoroid. This is the shape that creates these apparently supernatural, paranormal sort of phenomena where you get glowing orbs, very strange effects on batteries, cameras, and so forth. And you can look this up as a hypertoroid, fractal toroid, closed pointing vector. Some people called it non-radiating electromagnetism. It's focused inward. You might not even be able to detect it from a distance, but it's going to do something right where you're around. And perhaps this is what burnt out our cameras in those crop circles and stuff, because what are they shaped like? A toroid. They're shaped just like that. And it could be the same principle. Now, this is based on the idea this when you have these fractal toroids, you're changing the permittivity of space, electrical conductance. You're changing permeability. It's that strong. And as Hal Puthoff told us, and you remember Hal was there when Tom DeLonge introduced To the Stars Academy a number of years ago, right? Remember this presentation? Hal gave us a talk in 2018, IRVA SSE, about his knowledge of these UFO programs. And he told us point blank, it never ended with Project Blue Book, the Carol Bolender memo and so forth, saying that none of the really important sightings had gone through Blue Book to begin with, that the government always had programs, long before ATIP and OSAP, that these programs had been going on the whole time. And he told us that the idea that his people he had worked with, I'm assuming in his classified programs that he's worked with, I mean, he said he had been working with this for quite a while, that they felt that these UFOs, literally, the materials they were made of, the technology could affect the permittivity and permeability of space-time. It's the same idea. However they were structured, there could be different ways of doing this. And that would give UFOs a kind of a blue shift. They would appear bluish. It would make them slightly radioactive because their speed of light would be different than our speed of light. I mean, it'd be the same for them from their frame of reference, but changing the permeability of space-time, that's what the speed of light is based on, permeativity. When you change those, the speed of light's not the same. And this is why you could get these time slips and strange space-time experiences and have propulsion systems to boot, because these fractal toroidal systems go straight to the changing the structure of space-time itself. And this is what Hal Puthoff called it, space-time metric engineering. You could see the connection here between these fractal toroidal shapes and space-time metric engineering. Other people have called it vacuum engineering. It's the same thing, in my view, unless you can show a difference. Even Chris Mellon, when he started talking at the same time as Hal Puthoff to the Stars Academy, you remember this leak of Chris Mellon's slide 9? And then this was not classified because we asked him directly if this had been a classified briefing to Congress. He said this, somehow he left his website open and this document showed up. And what did they say were effects of UFOs around us, humans, and our equipment, the ATIP subfocus areas, psychotronic weapons, effects on human cognitive interfaces, aka telepathy, penetration of solid surfaces. Well, that would concern you if they're military, right? Instantaneous sensory disassembly. This is all Aharonov-Bohm effect as far as I'm concerned. Okay, this is what the Lockheed Martin patent is talking about. Manipulation of biological organisms, we'd have to be concerned about that. Space-time anomalies, hello. Remember Ron and the crop circle and missing time, and many people have experienced time slips in many different settings. This is a whole category in itself, time slips. Cognitive human interface experiences, like maybe that's like spontaneous RV. Anyway, there's a connection between these topics. I'm not claiming to have the final answer here, but there's an overlay that we see in all of these. And even Nevesky himself, who was working with Zerblis to try to explain the phantom fractal toroid, said that where you get these sort of chiral patterns, that means there's helicity, there's directionality in spin. You're going to have change in electromagnetic fields and macromolecules of matter, us. And this is the connection between crop circles, the shape, and our electronics and the experiences we have, and all the other phenomena, and why once you start getting involved in these areas, you can't necessarily separate them in neat, distinct little boxes. There's this overlap. So, even more fascinating, just researching this area, here's a dissertation from the UK. This guy says right in the beginning, Raybould, that fruit flies have these toroids built into their brain so they can detect magnetism and navigate across wherever the fruit flies are going. In other words, these toroidal shapes are built into our biology, which would give us access to sort of a greater awareness than we would typically have from our physical senses. So I think in this coherent matter phenomena, there's a lot of similarity. You've seen pictures of this type of ball lightning. Remember Ted Phillips, who worked with J. Allen Hynek? He studied the place called the Marley Ranch. It has another name. It was a ranch in southern Missouri. And they recorded these balls of light. And interesting effects around these balls of light, gravitational effects. Phillips, I mean, you can watch the videos from the Ozark Mountain UFO conference where he talked about Marley Ranch. He said at one point, one of these orbs went over a picnic table and the table started like levitating, shaking around. It's what you expect. It's the same anti-gravitational effect that John Archibald Whelan described in his Geons. But you saw it at Project Hestelin, okay, where they had these same sort of, Freiberger mentions Project Hestelin. He says it's ball lightning, same thing. Same kind of condensed matter. What's the physical evidence? You get these iron-rich crenellated spheres. You find it at ball lightning impact sites. I imagine you find this around Skinwalker Ranch. If we went out there, I bet you'd find some of these crenellated iron-rich spheres. This is what you find around ball lightning. It's been found in micrometeorites, but I don't think it's millions of years old. This is from the cavitational sonic cleaning equipment that the Japanese researchers used. Anytime you get this cavitation, compression of matter, you're going to get these spheres spontaneously forming. So this is sort of one physical evidence around ball lightning. It's quite fascinating. Some of it even looks like crop circles, okay? It looks like some of the same patterns at the microscopic. I mean, it's just an interesting coincidence there. Some idea. So how does this connect to cryptids and the whole thing? Well, I came across this because Bailey, Colorado has a Sasquatch Outpost Museum. In teaching RV, just like I heard from UFO witnesses in the early days of Farsight, people that had worked with the government and so forth. Being in RV for so long, teaching it in Boulder, until COVID, we would just have people meet, here in Boulder for over a long weekend. People would tell me these Bigfoot stories, and it didn't really click. I talked to many witnesses at UFO conferences, but it didn't click until I found something really fascinating. That you get camera and battery failure around cryptids, Bigfoot, your car stalls, the radio starts hissing just like from the NICAP report from the 60s. You get space-time distortion, brain fog. What is happening around these creatures is the same thing that happens around ball lightning and this sort of coherent matter. Maybe it's a slight oversimplification, but there's a lot of commonality here, and this is what led me to call it dark matter monsters. The same thing you find in these cold fusion experiments, you get the same phenomena happening of batteries failing, transformers blowing out. Those EVOs, like Ken Shoulders talk about, when they come apart, they can release a lot of energy as they come back to be regular matter. They can suck in a lot of heat, which makes the area feel cold, which is what people report around UFO sightings and cryptids and haunted locations, right? Sudden cold. It's one of the symptoms of Bigfoot, sudden quiet. These are all, the BFRO site, by the way, you can find where there's sightings in your area. And this showed me there were a lot of sightings around Boulder. I mean, we're right in the Rockies here. I had no idea people were encountering this, but they're not talking about it very much because of the stigma. The UAP task force report that we had last May And I'm looking forward to this new report that comes out from the Pentagon. We're told by the end of October that Congress wanted. Well, that original UAP task force report identified sociocultural stigma as preventing military pilots from coming forward. The same thing is true with Bigfoot sightings, and people often don't report it for quite a while. In this Sasquatch outpost, I find there are all these, vocalizations, the screams, the howls, the rock. People get rocks thrown at them. I've talked to these witnesses. It can be a little scary to have rocks coming at you when you can't see what's throwing it, and they can be pretty big. Tree structures, footprints. It was around my area, and it's probably around your area too. I've read about encounters just outside of LA, just an hour and a half away of encounters. I went to some conferences in Bailey, and just to sum it up here before we go to questions, Igor Bortsev, the Russian researcher, PhD, political scientist, became interested in Bigfoot. That's Don Monroe on the left. That's a U.S. researcher. Formerly, he had been in the Navy. Igor told us he originally thought, like you might have thought, and I thought, it's an undiscovered rare ape like Gigantopithecus or something, right? But it stands up. It's walking on two legs. It can vocalize. It can speak languages. It seems intelligent. So they may have thought maybe it's a relic human, like just an undiscovered type of relative of us, a human. Another type of, Neanderthal or something. But the witness reports are just like what you get around many, for lack of a better word, paranormal encounters, even the crop circles, battery failure, levitation of objects. Strange effects on cameras and the same sort of stuff. The same sort of stuff you find around cold fusion Leonard reactions, you find around crop circles, you find around UFOs. And I'm not saying all UFOs are just, it's all it is, but there's some component of that. What Hal Puthoff is simply calling space-time metric engineering. These creatures seem to be able to engage in space-time metric engineering. And Bortsev told us that his conclusion is that they're paranormal humans or some entity that's what he calls them. And even Jim Myers, who hosted this conference from Bailey, said he had come to the same conclusion. Why? Because the witnesses report them being there one moment and literally disappearing in front of your eyes as a curtain of light comes down. Or being in front of you, then they're behind you, then they're around you, like teleportation. And just so many strange effects, they just don't seem like your ordinary mammal. You don't normally have your cameras and batteries failing around ordinary mammals. The last time I went to the zoo, you just didn't have your cameras and batteries flip out like that. And other strange effects like losing track of time, losing consciousness. If Lockheed Martin can figure out the Aronov-Bohm effect and put it in the patent to create coherent matter, it just seems reasonable to me that there could be other types of life that figured this out 100,000 years ago and find it to have an advantage, a survival advantage. Why would they show themselves if they already figured out the Lockheed Martin patent 100,000 years? We assume we're the ones that we're at the top of the heap, but maybe there's other predators out there that are just already know how to do this, and maybe being invisible is an advantage a lot of the time in their cloaking when they're hunting or doing whatever they do. Gigantopithecus has never been found in the U.S., the bones, and it walked on all fours. But this is what anthropologists will say. And you will see some of these Bigfoot books in primatology and so forth. Even one of my cousins is an anthropologist, and we talked about this recently. And he just thinks, it's undiscovered primate. It's where I went to WSU, upstairs was the anthropology department. Grover Krantz, one of the original academics in the U.S. to study this, thought it was a relic primate. And he had the footprints and the evidence, and he just thought it was something like this. And I could have run into him. I wasn't interested back then. I was a good graduate student focused on my subject area. But I could have run into him on the halls and the elevator. One of the biggest Bigfoot researchers, Grover Krantz, he was right there. I never met him, and I didn't have an interest back then. But I don't think it's a relic primate. You can see the size. We're all familiar with the Patterson-Gimlin footage. Sometimes it just seems to have an ordinary flesh and blood appearance. And I've talked to researchers, and they say, I haven't heard about this paranormal side of it. But people who've been in it in a while, and so many of them write to me now and say, look, what you're talking about in your presentations like we're doing right now, I've seen that out there. I've seen the phenomena that is very hard to explain from just a typical physical point of view. And one of the researchers that pioneered this was Ron Moorhead. You can look up the Sierra Sounds. He's written a book called Voices in the Wilderness, and his other book is The Quantum Bigfoot. And he and his friends, they went to this hunting structure. They created it up in the Sierra Nevadas. These creatures were on the other side of the wall. They were that close. He could hear them talking, and they have a language. It's like a very fast chattering sound to us. Some people call it reverse samurai. But this is what's so interesting in having talked to Ron Moorhead. It's a lot more than that. They saw orbs around the area when these Bigfoot were there. They saw glowing objects. They heard what sounded like a gong above them, and they could never see these creatures, even though they were on the other side of the wall. They had mics in the walls. Look up Sierra sounds. You can hear them talking, and Ron talking with them, imitating their language and so forth. He said they were never destructive, but they could do things that would make you feel they were taking the camp apart. When they looked the next morning, everything was fine, and they were invisible. That's Ron. This is what the witnesses tell us. Invisible. He said only one occasion he caught a glimpse of one pretty far away, but the rest of the time, the sounds would seem like they're within 15 feet. Often very loud sounds. They can make your clothing vibrate. You know, their vocalizations can be so loud, their howls and growls. And you can read about this yourself, but he could never see them. This is what the witnesses tell us. Here's a video. You can see this where these researchers, it's on YouTube, they saw this small chimpanzee-like creature moving through an area where Bigfoot had been seen, perhaps a juvenile, but the camera didn't pick it up. You just see a wispy, kind of a transparent saran wrap shape image that's very reminiscent of that movie Predator, remember? Where it's just sort of like this shimmering image. This is what you can see on the camera. They replay it many times enlarged, but they saw it, but the camera didn't. And I was with a group. I went to Bailey in July on a Bigfoot adventure weekend, as it's called, to go out at night and go to areas where they've been seen and there's been activity, the tree structures and the howls and the growls and all that, the footprints. We didn't see anything. I mean, it was really quiet night out. We went back out there till 1 a.m., a site where they had been seen and detected many times, and huge trees had been moved when people were hiking. They came back, a huge tree across the path. And so this group, there was a woman there on the left. She was a great vocalist, and she started singing that type of sound that you associate with them, those long howls. We heard her do it. She reproduced it the next morning. They saw them. At least they told us they saw them. And they were really excited in the camp when they came back at 1:30. I went to bed. They had seen them. They saw them through thermal imagers. They heard the howls. They kind of initiated some sort of contact. So to me, these seem like creatures. They're tall, very tall. It was as tall as that branch. Having spoken to so many witnesses and realizing there's connection to these other phenomena, crop circles and many other phenomena. This is an example I wrote about in the book, Boiling River Trail. And I learned about this from Rusty Wilson's collection of stories. Tom Lyons is another guy that collects. You can find these books in it. Collects witnesses' stories. Read them for yourself and make your own mind up. But to me, they seem authentic. And this was a woman who liked to record wildlife sounds with her boyfriend, who was a former Yellowstone ranger. They went to this river, which is closed in the winter technically, and they went out there because they knew there wouldn't be people there. But they encountered a glowing Bigfoot. They said blue light was coming off it, and it followed them. The guy started losing consciousness, perhaps from the electric charge. He had to be sort of carried partly back to the half-mile trail. He passed out partly. And when they got back to the car wouldn't start. Go figure. The creature's coming up, looks down through the window. I mean, they're so tall, they're looking down. And she said it illuminated the entire inside of the car. Now, this is stuff that seems fantastic probably to you, but having read so many of these encounters, talking to the witnesses, I think this is what they're experiencing. The reason we don't hear more about this, again, sociocultural stigma. I've talked to people up in the Northwest near where I went to WSU, and people have had these different encounters. Even recently, this woman contacted me who had heard some of these interviews just like 2 weeks ago. And I did an interview with her. You can find it on my YouTube channel. Just look for my name on YouTube. She went camping, archaeology dig, China Lake Naval Weapons Station, but the Smithsonian had access to it, petroglyphs. 4 of them went out there, 3 guys and her, and something starts stroking her head. As soon as they lay down, she thinks it's the guy next to her getting funny, but it's not him. He's just has his hands in his sleeping bag. They all get out and they see just 12 feet away, as she described, a black on black 9 to 10 foot Bigfoot with huge glowing yellow eyes. Glowing yellow eyes that emit light. And there was no moon that night. These are not reflecting anything. And it stared at them and they stared back. It eventually disappeared, but they saw footprints the next morning Curiously, no one took photographs, and she's always wondered to this day why they didn't take photographs, given that they all had cameras, but there were the large footprints. So these creatures have a mix of physical characteristics, and what to me seems like coherent matter. I mean, to be able to generate a glow from your eyes would be very reminiscent of charge clusters and so forth. At least that's my idea about it. And finally, just a couple examples before we go to questions. Even at Marley Woods, Ted Phillips in his lecture points out that they encountered cryptids. These are other cryptids, meaning sort of mysterious life forms. They couldn't tell what this was. It was 300 to 400 pounds. And Ted said that the witness, this is the best image they got. A veterinarian couldn't identify this, and even thick legs, kind of like a polar bear, but walked at the speed of a sloth, two of them, seen at the tree line. It walked near a fence and through a fence. They saw the rancher who shot at it. He said he saw a red blood stain. There was no blood found. They just kept walking like nothing had happened, which is very reminiscent if you read about Skinwalker Ranch when they have shot at the rancher shooting at these upright wolves, these dogmen, no effect. This is what you hear in some of these cases. Here is 16-inch hair that cannot be identified from DNA analysis. And it leaves footprints, but it walks through a fence. This is what people report. What would that remind you of? To me, that is another type of matter. It would make sense given what we know coherent matter. It's if you have this fractal toroidal systems within you, you can generate coherent matter and you could teleport just like the Lockheed Martin patent tells us you could do. You can cloak, you can change forms, as people have seen. And finally, this is my last slide, and again, thanks for listening. This is exactly what John Brennan, former CIA director, said. And again, this is courtesy of John Ramirez, who had this as part of his presentation. What did Brennan tell us in response to, ATIP, OSAP, and the current congressional investigations and so forth? He said, there's some type of phenomena that's the result of something we don't yet understand. And that could involve some type of activity that some might say constitutes a different form of life. To me, that just doesn't just apply to extraterrestrials. It's these cryptids. They're right here. They're not from out there. I mean, I think they're evolved on Earth, and they're very good at being stealthy if they want to be. This is what the witnesses tell us they see. And even if people are reluctant to talk about it for fear of ridicule, it's a different form of life. I mean, what else do you need? You have a former CIA director telling you it's real. It's good enough for me. In any case, thanks for listening. This is quite a long lecture. I appreciate your attention. You can contact me through Twitter, YouTube. My blog is New Crystal Mind, which has links to all these books and things I'm doing. Any questions, folks? Anything at all? You're welcome to challenge any of this or ask questions, whatever you want to do.
Simeon, first of all, I want to congratulate you on keeping everybody captivated for 2 hours. It was absolutely fascinating and very wide-ranging.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, we'll proceed to questions, and everybody try not to talk over each other, just whoever talks first. There we go. We don't have any questions.
Maybe get some people to raise their hand. We got Barbara Lamb.
Right. Hi, Simeon.
Barbara! So nice to see you again.
Hey, my old buddy. We're crop circle buddies from...
Here we are again. Barbara and I met in a crop circle decades ago, back in the UK.
Oh.
We've been friends ever since.
We certainly have. And I've really enjoyed this talk so much. I want to go back to the crop circles for a moment. Have you actually, with the man-made crop circles, I know you have personally participated in the making of some of those, and probably not others, but have there been tests done, like measurements of the energy with electrostatic voltmeters or magnetometers, et cetera, of the man-made ones? And do they show anything different than the results of what we consider the genuine crop circles?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And we did get some of these anomalies on the static meter here and there. We got the blown nodes. In the node is the part of the wheat plant where the plan has the phototropic response. When we looked at them a couple days later, you could see some of those explosions at the nodes, which people had attributed to microwaves. So again, I don't know if that's just overexposure to the sun once they're flat, but I would say, Barbara, it's still an unresolved question for me, whether those reproduce the ones that we made. And you know, having been out there, there's only so much time you can spend out there. It's not your property. You can't just keep going back all the time. How much equipment can you bring to the UK? I would have liked to have things like gravitometers and laser interferometry, really good sensitive stuff for detecting very subtle changes. We never have had that. It would be expensive to do that. So for me, it's still an open question, apart from some of the photo anomalies that I showed you, which is some evidence that something's going on. I do know that the Devil's Den formation I showed you, I learned, to my best understanding, who had been involved with that one. I was able to identify some of these formations over the years that I previously didn't know who had made that. I'm confident I was able to talk to some of the artists. So to me, it seemed like I could say that the man-made ones had created the camera and battery failure. Also, that doesn't mean, again, that it's explaining it away, but human artists created ones would do that, in my view.
Human artists, what was that?
The ones that were made by human artists had those, you know, they were in the fractal toroidal shape. They had fractal toroidal effects. That's my view of it. And I think we could see that over the years, because many of these I got to learn later who had made them, and they seemed to be the ones that had been electrically active.
Right. Okay. So another thing is that I noticed, and when I took groups into them, have my people noticed too, that the man-made ones seemed to be, well, they just kind of looked dead. And actually, the plants were dead because they were broken where they had been stomped over. And so even newcomers whom I would take into some of the man-made crop circles definitely right away saw and sort of felt a difference between those and the ones that we at least consider were the genuine ones. So in other words, there was not only the matter of detecting it with instrumentation, but just people's experience in them. Well, it was really different in a man-made one.
I understand that point of view, Barbara, but there is no way to know ahead of time when you walk in it what made it. And there was this sort of bias that we all developed, that the ones that we really liked, we would say, well, that wasn't the man-made one. And the ones that looked dead, well, that had to be man-made. But we made one at Hill Martin, which Lucy Pringle came into, and she was amazed that none of the stalks were broken. That we had used a material on the bottom of the boards that was very slick, like a type of wax, and it didn't break anything. And she said, how did you do this? You could ask her. Now, I'm not saying it explains it all away, but I think, myself included at the time, we didn't know which ones were which. And I do believe, again, that you could have very well-made man-made ones. There are examples in Opening Minds where I feel like I interviewed many of the people that were involved in making it, and they were some of the best ones. So I don't think that we could really say you could tell ahead of time which one was made by plasmas or whirlwinds and which one was made. I don't think you can really know. If there was a test that could detect it, it would be great. And
the group that meditated for it is ecstatic.
Ecstatic. There it is. The shape. And some, it's in the field. It's in the field of information, and it just goes through a person, To me, it still has the magic. And I know a lot of people don't accept that point of view, but I'm going to stick to my point of view that the man-made ones can be magical too.
Simeon,
I get it.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Thanks, Barbara. Any other? Thanks so much, and thanks for being here.
Go ahead, Tim.
Oh, thank you, Simeon.
Yeah.
Great talk.
Tim, go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to make a comment regarding Bigfoot and their alleged talents for disappearing, etc. From what I've read extensively with David Paulides' work, these creatures are very good at mental projection. And through two psychic individuals that I used to know who were very powerful projectionists, if that term can be used, I know that it is possible to project an image to somebody that you want them to see or not see. So I think that's the phenomenon that's happening with Bigfoot encounters, where people believe that they suddenly disappear right in front of them. It's a projection of invisibility, the erasure, if you will, of the Bigfoot image in that person's mind.
That's another possibility. I mean, we don't know for certain. These all could be possible explanations. There are cases where people see the footprints going near them. They hear the leaves rustling, but they don't see anything. And other cases where they hear sounds, but they don't see any footprints. And then there's those famous cases where the footprints end in trackable ground, like the Navajo Ranger Jonathan Dovers talked about, where he was trained in tracking people and animals. And he said, in muddy areas, the footprints come to an end. He said it was just like they were lifted off into space. So none of us know enough to say, rule out any possibility. But what you're saying certainly could be possible, because people do report being inside their homes or cabins and hearing a voice projected into their mind asking them to go outside. They say it's very hard to resist this voice. And some of them do go outside, kids especially. The cases I've read, the kids weren't harmed or anything. They just, encountered these creatures or spent some time with them and then came back. But they do seem to have the ability to project mental images and thoughts and so forth. So you can't rule that out. To me, it just seems very interesting that when you're looking at the Aronoff-Bohm effect and this coherent matter, that's one of the fundamental traits of coherent matter is it doesn't have the space-time limitations that we do. It can jump around. So it's certainly a lot of possibilities there, and David Paulides' research into it is certainly a big contribution.
All right, I don't know what else we got, but there's a question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
In the chat box, it says, what differentiates an orb that many see in haunted areas from actual ball lightning? Is there an electrical sound that comes with ball lightning?
Yeah, I don't think there is a difference. I think fundamentally, physically, it's the same phenomena. I am not trying to explain the apparent intelligence of these orbs away. They seem to have the ability to move around and interact. But even at Skinwalker Ranch, you had these cases where they call them orbs, where they seem to be intelligently moving around, created destruction of the livestock. There was that case where the dogs were apparently turned to puddles of fat and so forth. If you look at the history of ball lightning, and I've spent a lot of time reading these cases going back 100 years and earlier, one of the characteristics is that it's so unpredictable what it's going to do when it contacts you. It might do nothing. And there's one guy I contacted by email through their sites online that have collected ball lightning cases. He was blown back by an explosion of one of them in the Philadelphia area. So there's a whole range of experiences. I think the orbs and ball lightning are very fundamentally the same thing. Ball lightning can seem super intelligent. People report it like playing with them. But you have to understand that ball lightning is so sensitive to static gradients. And Barbara and I were talking, we had this static meter. We would measure static charges. Some of the circles would really make that meter move around. Sometimes they wouldn't. You could see volt by volt. And sometimes they just blew that meter off the charts, and some didn't. And initially, like Barbara was saying, we thought, those are the real ones, and the ones where the static meter doesn't work is the man-made ones, until we saw a man-made one made in front of us in the daytime at the Pattern R, and the meter was moving around. So we realized that theory wasn't right. But this ball lightning is very sensitive to static gradients, is why it moves down an aisle of a plane right between the seats. It's so sensitive, and it can move towards people and stuff. So in my view, I'm just going to make the argument, I think there's similar phenomena. I'm not ruling out that there isn't some sort of intention and consciousness connected to some of these orbs. There's probably more going on than I understand about it, but I think it's the same type of coherent matter phenomena if you physically looked at the material there, I think it would be the same coherent matter. Whether you call it orbs or ball lightning is just, to me, a matter of semantics. I think it's the same phenomena at its core.
Oh, okay.
I could be wrong, but that's what I think I'm arguing here.
There's a question here that I don't particularly understand because I'm not familiar with this term, but it's in the chat box. Do you think UFOs are here to collect the neuroidal energy, or do UFOs emit the neuroidal energy? If the UFOs emit the energy, can we use random number generators or a pendulum to know when they're close?
Does that make sense to you?
I don't know enough about neuroidal energy to know about that. I can't really answer that question. But let me just say one thing. When these dark matter, I'm calling them dark matter life forms because they're hidden just like dark matter is, and they seem to sustain their own their energetic reaction. These Bigfoot can chase cars at highway speeds. It's a lot of it. Where are they getting that energy from at 1,000 pounds? People report them gliding and sliding over the forest trail. I don't think it's just, metaphors. People literally say they seem to be gliding, not walking. People have been lifted up by them, and I know some of these people who've been taken out of their tents by them, not far from here. It's not something that you necessarily want to have happen. But people have reported being carried by them at least maybe 100 yards off into the distance. They say there's no footsteps. There's no up and down motion. It's like gliding over the forest. They said it was the strangest feeling until they got put down. All of a sudden, they felt the gravity come back. It's like Ken Shoulders talking about these charge clusters having their own sort of energy, like they're in their own reality. This is what Shoulders told us and other people that have studied exotic vacuum objects and this coherent matter. It seems to form its own reality within its own space. And within that space, it's different. It's different rules of space-time, different permittivity and permeability. It seems to me, based on what we know. So I don't know if these ETs, we could detect it directly, but it does seem to me that reading, and it's not just Bigfoot, there's other types of these cryptids around. You can read about it for yourself. I don't want to put ideas into your head that aren't there yet, but they do seem to affect your surroundings. I remember hearing one case on a podcast where a woman in the Smoky Mountains said she had seen them out in a distance and she thought they were walking around her porch. She goes to turn on the porch light. It doesn't work. Hey, hello. Electrical failure. And this is what people report. All of a sudden, car won't start. You want to get out of there. It's coming at you. No car. Igor Bortsev described to me, I asked him about the levitation. He said when they were in their van without a battery attached, they were using the battery for heating or something. It started on its own when the creature came by. Objects, lights came out of their sockets. Coins started floating in the air. It just seems to me very similar to Hal Puthoff's space-time metric engineering. And I'm just arguing here, it's not just us that's figuring this out. There's other life forms around that probably already know how to do this, and this is what we're seeing. ETs included. The ETs, again, it'd be a much bigger subject matter because of all the number of species out there. But this seems to me an earthly life form that already knows how to do a lot of what we think we're discovering right now. Because it's how nature works. It's just how nature works.
Any other questions? Hearing none, then maybe we're going to wrap it up.
I've got one. This is Gary.
Good.
All right.
Simeon, let me get my picture down here. We were at Contact in the Desert in 2016, a bunch of us from our CE5 group, and there were about 100 of us up on the hill at Orion's Overlook, and 10 UFOs flew through within a half hour through the valley, right across the campground. And when you looked at them, I looked at them with my binoculars, they looked like a big beach ball that you could see through clear, but they were not really real clear, and it had smoke inside, and the smoke was whatever color it was. And one of the people there took her laser pointer and blinked at it 3 times. Blink, blink, blink. And it went blue, green, blue, green, blue, green. Mm-hmm. And when they flew through and got even with us, I got sick as a dog. I had to sit down. Right. I got like infrasound. I don't know. Somebody said it could have been that. Other people got a feeling that it was love they were feeling. Then I'd go by and the feeling would be gone. Next one would come through, different color, got even with me, sick as a dog. I had to sit down again.
Right, these energies can affect you in all sorts of different ways. And Barbara and I can say, having been in crop circles, some of them made you feel great and some of them made you feel sick. Just like you're saying, it's like that energy wasn't right for you. And some of them made you feel elated and wonderful. It just reminds me of what you're saying. Because we don't know exactly what we're dealing with. And it's a frequency, it's a type of its own space-time structure within that space. UFOs, they're so, in my experience, and you can correct me, it's so unpredictable how they're going to feel when they get close to you, what the effects are going to be, and are you going to be taken aboard? What's going to happen? There's so many unknowns, which is why I think we don't experience it as much as we might, or maybe we're forgetting about the experiences we have because it doesn't fit in easily into any mental box, right? Whole different physics principles and so forth. Then it seems to me you're describing some of that. I went out with Stephen Greer once. We went after a UFO conference in Laramie, the Rocky Mountain UFO conference. 80 people, and we had done his CE5 visualization. And wouldn't you believe it? Something came right over us, and a beam of light came out of there. It was blue, the object, but all of a sudden became really blue, like a laser deep blue. And it was absolutely astounding. It was astounding. That's all I can say. Coming from the sky, this blue light. What was that? I mean, Stephen at the time said it's a group scan. It could have been. I just, to this day, I don't know what it was, but I saw it. And about 40 other people did too. So,
about probably a dozen or more people made a report on it, filed it with MUFON and with other organizations. But basically, some of them thought the thing was moving really fast. Oh man, it's 1,000 miles an hour going by. I'm seeing it in the valley between the hill, between us going over the campground, 50 miles an hour.
Okay. I got to say something about that because again, that gets back to what Hal was talking about, space-time metric engineering. There's kind of these shifts. And it goes back to the earlier question from Tim, I think, about telepathic projections. So there are people who've encountered Bigfoot in groups. I'm thinking about this case I just read about 2 nights ago, out just very close to LA, some wilderness area, not far from those of you in the LA area, to the east, I believe. And no one could agree what it looked like later. Some people thought it looked like a cat, and this is often what you hear around Bigfoot sightings. It seems cat-like. The face seems cat-like on 2 legs. Other people thought it looked like an ape, which you hear sometimes. The fourth person said it looked like a caveman, not at all like an ape or a cat, like a hairy cave. So what is it, this mental projection, or there's another explanation? Our perceptual systems in our mind are kind of hardwired for what we're used to in ordinary reality. Your mind literally edits out. Ingo Swann used to talk about this. Your mind edits out things that it doesn't think should be there, and it changes what they look like. Ellen Langer at Harvard used to do experiments with this, with kittens, about changing their environment. You can't see certain things after a while that you're not familiar with. So I'm wondering if some of this is our perception, or do you think it's that object was doing both at this? It's very strange, isn't it? You can't.
We actually have it on video.
And what does the video show?
It looks like it's just moving at 50 miles an hour below the hills.
There you
go. Goes up beyond the hills and goes off into infinity. And the next one, the same thing. Some of them were at the same time, 2 or 3 of them, kind of floating along the same way. So very interesting. But a Paranormal Society of Oklahoma videoed it, so we've got a couple minutes of it.
Yeah, it's just very different from ordinary reality. And again, there's so many mental mechanisms we have. There's a great movie that I've seen recently, and I have to say I'm in the sequel that it will come out in next year, called A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed. Now, what I'm just mentioning this because the psychiatrist that they interviewed, and it's about a half hour of interviews with psychiatrists and psychologists towards the end of the documentary. You can watch this on streaming services. I recommend it. This is great photography and great witnesses. You'll really learn a lot. These psychiatrists say, not only will you distort your perception of it, like you're suggesting, or, have a PTSD reaction to a close-up Bigfoot encounter. Like this woman I mentioned who was, touched through the tent, and they go out and it's standing right there. She didn't talk about it for 50 years, she said, till our interview. She just didn't talk. Who's going to believe you, It's worse than this. You won't remember it. you won't remember it because it doesn't fit anywhere in your mind, your physical mind, in the categories we're all familiar with. Even people like all of you that do this research, or like Barbara and myself who've been out to crop circles, we've deliberately gone into these non-ordinary spaces to see what's out there, what we experience with our groups and so forth. Some of it is beyond what you can describe. And they were saying in this documentary, it's quite possible that some of us have had encounters with Sasquatch or Bigfoot or other cryptids. We don't remember it because it's just so far out of what your brain is used to. Think about our ordinary worlds and the spaces we're in. It's so out of that your brain will just forget about it. And this is what I've talked to witnesses who've said. It, not just like what you're mentioning about UFOs and what speed was it. They will say they were hiking and all of a sudden they were in the parking lot and they don't know how they got back there after hiking a half mile in or so forth into the trail. And all of a sudden they're back. I don't know if any of you have heard it. It reminds me of these cases that Preston Dennett has, someone you're all familiar with, someone from your neck of the woods, a great researcher. These cases where it's just so bizarre and you don't know what happened. And in these cases, I'm wondering, did they encounter a Sasquatch out there? I don't know. It could have been something else, but they don't know how they got, both of them don't know how they got back to the parking lot again. And it's a couple hours later. You hear this around these Sasquatch encounters where the last thing they remember is these glowing red eyes, and a couple hours is missing, and they find themselves back in their car. They don't know how they got back there. What happened? We don't know. But your brain is deleting a lot of it.
Same with the ET encounters.
Right. It's beyond the boggle point. As Michael
notices, they got each other's clothes.
Recording stopped.
What was that?
That was just
they noticed that
he talking back to me that I stopped the recording.
Yeah, no. What was Gary? I missed Gary's last sentence.
The only thing is they were back in the car, but they had each other's clothes on.
Right. So that's, yeah. So these guys we're dealing with, and we're all pioneers in being involved in this area. And I think the UAP Task Force report and all the stuff that's going on in Congress right now is realizing this, which is why a lot of it's classified and we haven't heard it. This is really strange for our brains to process any of these phenomena that are beyond ordinary matter. We're not used to dealing with quantum coherent matter and things teleporting and cloaking. And even if it is projection, like Tim is suggesting, we haven't talked about it publicly. We're not really used to this. So I'm sure a lot of this is deleted out of your mind. So, you're back to normal. I mean, we're survival oriented. You can't blame the brain for doing this. It wants to get you back to your life again. But I'm convinced we're experiencing these things and not remembering a lot of it. Just like, I think this is what we're going to be finding with the UFO topic. And I think this is why Congress is a little reluctant right now to have these hearings go public. I'm sure you're aware that apparently Dave Fravor and the other pilot, Alex and Dietrich, I think there were references from some of the To the Stars Academy people that they had experienced some sort of anomalies. I can't find out what they were and they haven't talked about it. But I forget if it was Jim Semivan. Maybe some of you know. Somebody said that those Tic Tac witnesses, I spoke to Kevin Day, the radar operator. You can see that on my YouTube channel. I met him at the MegaCon in Laughlin in 2019. And I interviewed some of the other people on the Nimitz and the Princeton. But you wonder, is it the proximity to the object? It just seems that they may have experienced things too that we haven't really heard much about. And there certainly hasn't been any public discussion about it.
Have you seen Carolyn Corey's new movie, A Terror in the Sky?
No, I haven't. No.
Oh, you got to see it. It's going to blow your mind. Sure. They caught a Tic Tac.
Right. Mm-hmm. So to sum this up, I think, these are great questions. There's a lot we don't know about all this. I'm certainly not the expert on all of this. I'm just suggesting some directions that we should be looking in, given the commonalities between some of these phenomena, what we know about quantum mechanics and so forth. But I think this is a process that we're all going to go through as a society. And it can't be too fast because we don't know what we're dealing with and we don't know how much we've forgotten of our own experiences and what experiencers tell us once they've been through hypnosis and so forth. It's quite complex, and I think we need to go through it carefully, but we do need to have this discussion, this national discussion of what we're encountering here, whether it's cryptids or ETs, these phenomena, because, do we want to live in a fantasy world or we want to live in reality, what's really going on? I think we all want to grow up. We don't want to stay in kindergarten. If you're on this call right now, you don't want to stay in kindergarten. You want to know what's going on, like I do and like a lot of others. And this is what's going on right now. I think we've just decided we don't need to be in kindergarten anymore. Let's go to first grade and just go to the next. So who are we dealing with? What are some of these things that are going on? And do we have memories that are not conscious, like these psychiatrists are suggesting in Flash of Beauty? I mean, it's a really good question, but my gut feeling now, this is the last I'll say, I think a lot's going to come out because I've talked to people that I still haven't really mentioned publicly because they don't want to come forward. I'm sure you know people like this. They've had experiences or something. They don't want to really come forward yet. But when we all combine our experiences, I think it's a much more complex reality than we've been conscious of. That's what I think. Yep.
All right. If there are no more questions, we'll let him go. I mean, this has been a long program.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for hanging in there.
All kinds of comments in the chat section about people really enjoying it. So.